This video continues with Chapter 61, The True Inventor. Marvel, the Imposter Inventor. Chapter 61, The True Inventor. Chapter 61, The True Inventor. The orange tennis ball, about the size of a basketball, was emitting a faint white glow. That's right, these are the core components that Luca has recently collected. Luca, who had finally been able to settle down and develop his business after dealing with Kingpin, was busy handling the aftermath of the incident and trying to gradually get involved in the company's operations. He spent most of his time shopping, scratch that, searching for and collecting more crafting items. However, Luca initially wanted to try to collect the Conan 5-piece set and see what would happen when the 1-5 on the cheat code panel became 5-5. Therefore, he actually searches more in stores like watch shops and clothing stores, where there is a high probability that props such as anesthesia watches, voice-changing bow ties, and elastic suspenders will be available. Unexpectedly, I didn't come across any of the Conan series gadgets in the end. Instead, I accidentally discovered this glowing orange tennis ball in the pet toy section of the mall. Well, actually, this thing was originally intended to be a dog entertainment ball. However, Luca didn't care about all that. Most importantly, the item's description seems to be exactly what Luca needs. Moreover, since the 720 micron level neural stimulation units required for the Tux 1 tactical uniform, magic tuxedo item are quite difficult to obtain. The synthetic materials for this brand new item actually arrived even earlier. Luca gently placed his hand on the dog-themed entertainment ball in front of him. The next moment, a light blue panel appeared. Hello Gundam 1/5 Manufacturer. Europa Research Vessel, proposed Changemaker 0026 score component, orange tennis. Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, 2, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. LED Chinese letter, Chinese letter. 1 Chinese letter, 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 Chinese letter. Chinese letter, Chinese letter, 1 Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. Chinese letter, 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 2, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese. Description: multifunctional intelligent pet. A small intelligent robot with multiple functions including human-computer interaction, weapon repair and manufacturing, programming, and mecha piloting. Due to the material of its outer shell, it is virtually indestructible by conventional attacks, and its internal chip stores a wealth of cutting-edge technology. Friendly reminder: don't treat it like an ordinary electronic pet. After all, to you, it might be more like a real mechanical master. That's right. This seemingly ridiculous core component, actually synthesized into the famous true protagonist of the entire Gundam series, the ace Gundam pilot, Haro Robot. Most importantly, according to the panel description, this version of the Hello Robot is not simply an electronic pet. It also integrates multiple functions such as weapon repair and manufacturing, programming, and mech piloting. If Hello is really as amazing as they claim, maybe this little thing really is a real inventor than this imposter. Luca, full of anticipation, did not hesitate at all. He picked up the tennis ball and put it down. He then took out the other synthetic materials one by one from the newly arrived delivery box and drew a circular array on the ground with chalk. Then placed these synthetic consumables one by one into the formation. LED beads, smart chips, and multi-directional robotic arms. Once all the synthetic materials were lit up with white light, Luca let out a long sigh of relief and clapped his hands at the edge of the circular array. Mind silently. Synthesis. The next instant, a milky white light enveloped the entire magic circle. As the light faded, a round robot, which looked about 7 or 8 parts similar to the previous dog-themed puzzle ball, suddenly appeared in the center of the magic circle. It's done. Luca had an idea. The orange-yellow round robot suddenly had its pair of red beady eyes light up and flash. Immediately following this was a beep sound from an electronic notification. Next moment. Start. The round robot with red light flashing in its eyes rolled away from the center of the magic circle and came to Luca's side while repeating its startup voice. Highest authority, highest authority. Luca, Luca. So, there really is a restrictive procedure similar to the 0th law of the Big Bang. It just feels a bit silly. Looking at the bouncy little gadget in front of him, Luca felt that it wasn't as intelligent as the cheat system had described. Hello. Hello, hello. He really is a bit silly, Luca remarked. No sooner had he said that than Harrow jumped up angrily and slammed his head into Luca's knee. Not stupid, not stupid. Luca's an idiot, Luca's an idiot. Luca. This little thing has quite a temper. Harrow reached out and stopped Harrow from headbutting him again. He squeezed the robot, which was supposed to be made of E-carbon, a special material from the Zero Gundam world, and found it to be quite elastic. When dropped on the ground, it bounces back up just like a real tennis ball toy, even after being squeezed and deformed. Is it some kind of conceptual power created to adhere to the original? Thinking that his cheat ability seemed to be so unreasonable all along, Luca simply stopped worrying about it and instead became more excited about the functions of Harrow described in the cheat ability panel. He immediately asked a question. Hello, tell me, what functions do you have? Upon hearing Luca's question, the little toy, which had been bouncing around, finally stopped. The mechanical arm, which flapped its ears, slowly landed and stabilized itself. Then, the red light in its two beady eyes kept flashing. However, just as Luca was eagerly waiting for Harrow to introduce himself, unexpectedly, the little thing in front of him jumped up again and hit Luca's instep, repeating what he said in a somewhat angry tone. Stupid Luca, stupid Luca. Upon hearing this, Luca was taken aback at first, but then immediately grabbed Harrow with both hands and began to rub him with great displeasure. I have the highest authority, you little brat. Before Luca could finish his sentence, he saw Harrow, whom he was kneading, spit out a data cable with a connector from its body, while still continuing to mock him. Connect device, the language is complicated, the language is complicated. Luca, who had been somewhat resentful, finally realized what was happening. Given that hello can only speak in two-word phrases, if I were to introduce all its features to myself, I probably wouldn't finish talking until next month. The little guy had been waiting patiently in place, actually waiting for Luca to bring over a computer so he could connect the data cable. Somewhat embarrassed, Luca ignored Harrow's mocking gaze and obediently carried the little thing to the computer and connected it to the data cable. Immediately afterwards, a red light flashed in Harrow's eyes. Its various data capabilities were then displayed one by one on the computer screen. For those who haven't seen Gundam, let me tell you how awesome Harrow is in this series. This thing was initially involved in the development of the GN drive and Gundam. Subsequently, in cooperation with Celestial Being, they replicated a large number of Harrow auxiliary functions. The villains developed the pseudo-solar reactor because they obtained another purple Gundam. The Celestial Being organization, the main characters group, has very few members on its Ptolemy ship. Basically, they rely on these Harrows to help with everything from maintaining the mechs and doing daily work to operating the ship and using the healing pods. Then this thing can also pilot Gundams, pilot auxiliary MAs, and write Gundam operating systems. However, in the original story, Harlow's awesomeness was probably due to his connection to the Veda super server. I won't turn this into a super server, but I'll still make sure it has all the basic data and fundamental AI capabilities. P.S. Looking for an emoticon that represents hello, tried many, but none of them seem right. End of this chapter. Chapter 62, Ups and Downs. Chapter 62, Ups and Downs. Looking at the various data displayed on the screen, Luca couldn't help but gasp. But hello, with a data cable plugged in next to her, still wasn't behaving herself and continued to bounce around on the table, praising herself. Hello, awesome, hello, awesome. Luca, who was focused on checking the screen, reached out and pinned the little rascal down to prevent it from causing trouble. However, he immediately realized this as soon as he finished the action. Am I being a bit presumptuous by treating this thigh like this? Thinking of this, Luca quickly changed his hand from pressing down to stroking, while his eyes remained fixed on the screen. That's why his attitude has changed 180 degrees at this moment. The information displayed on the screen made Luca feel as if he had just taken a big gulp of ice drink on a sweltering summer day, feeling refreshed from head to toe. The database inside this unremarkable orange hello contains not only knowledge on auxiliary tasks such as parts repair, equipment operation, and programming. More importantly, perhaps to facilitate development and maintenance, several kinds of very complete and well-organized production materials are stored here in a well-organized manner. Gundam Nuclear Furnace, Solar Furnace. GN0000 Gundam, GNY001 Justice Gundam, GN Particle Tank, Prototype GN Physical Sword, GN Beam Sword, GN Beam Rifle, GN Shield, Prototype GN Cannon, Prototype Avalanche Component. Gundam Operating System, E-Carbon Armor Hello Maintenance Support Mech. Luca flipped through the documents in one go. Every file stored in Orange Harrow's body was detailed and complete. From structural parameters to original code, from experimental machine technology to development and derivative ideas. It seems that as long as we have these development materials and invest funds and time, we can really mass-produce a group of super powerful Gundams. At this moment, Luca's eyes began to gleam with a faint green light as he looked at Harrow. Keep in mind, this is a Gundam mobile suit from the 00 series. Even within the entire Gundam universe, it's a mystical Gundam that's labeled as a realistic mobile suit, but has actually reached the threshold of super in every aspect. When things really get out of control, a lightsaber capable of slicing through a satellite at a range of 400 kilometers is no joke. Moreover, setting aside the Zero Gundam, which was the first generation of mobile suits, it's unknown what era the Harrow Gundam was created from, but it even contained complete information about the Justice Gundam. It's important to know that the Justice Gundam is not the third-generation mobile suit used by the main characters in the original work. However, as a versatile mobile suit developed to test more compatible solutions during the research and development process, it is considered the most perfect and mature model among the second-generation Gundam mobile suits in terms of both various values and stability. The database also contains many derivative models of the Justice Gundam. However, when Luca, who was full of anticipation, suddenly remembered something, he immediately began to carefully and purposefully review the core information of Justice Goddess Gundam. As a result, his previously excited expression suddenly vanished. Wait, why does everything in the Zero Gundam need a GN drive? Somewhat unwilling, Luca quickly checked the other files, but the truth was as it was. Not only products with the prefix GN such as GN Sword and GN Beam Gun require a solar furnace for power. Beam guns generate rays by compressing GN particles. Beam sabers also gather GN particles, and flight is propelled by GN particles. Even the mech's own transmission system, communication signal equipment, power engine, and even the desire to improve the defensive capabilities of the E-Carbon armor. Its core functions all rely on GN particles, released by the GN furnace to operate. Then the first complete set of information in the Mingaming Harrow database is the manufacturing manual for the solar furnace. Why is Luca still in such a sorry state? Luca looked at Harrow with a last glimmer of hope. The Harrow solar furnace, does it really have to be manufactured in Jupiter's unique gravitational environment? However, the result was different. Jupiter, necessary condition, necessary condition. Harrow completely ignored Luca's slightly trembling voice and continued to hop and skip along. Upon hearing this, Luca's aura instantly dissipated, as if all his energy and spirit had been drained. That's right. All the groundbreaking technologies of the 00 series Gundam, and its bizarre, almost mystical abilities, are built upon the magical GN particles. To compress and generate GN particles, one needs a GN drive, a semi-permanent energy core. However, the manufacture of the solar furnace requires the unique gravitational environment of Jupiter. In other words, after going around in circles, Luca, who still lacks the ability to send a research spacecraft to Jupiter, finds all these technologies to be nothing more than a mirage. Of all the data in Harlow's body, Perhaps only a small portion is barely usable now. That's not entirely true. Whether GN particles even exist in the Marvel universe is still debatable. Thinking about it this way, Luca felt even more hopeless about the future. Luca glanced at Harrow, who was rolling around on the table beside him, and asked listlessly, "If you don't have Gundam, Flag or Iron Man would also work, right?" The two types of mecha that Luca asked about are humanoid mechas manufactured by two countries that are not the main characters in the Zero Gundam world. Their strength is definitely not comparable to Gundam, but they are still humanoid combat mechas that are groundbreaking. However, the result was as he expected. Harlow's eyes flashed red as he gave the answer directly. I don't know. What about the simulated solar furnace?" Luca pressed on. Pseudo-solar furnace is a replica of the solar furnace created by the villainous organization in the original work. It does not need to be manufactured on Jupiter, but rather relies on a special drive system to activate an energy-consuming core that generates GN particles using electricity. Although this device produces red GN particles that are harmful to the human body due to insufficient compression. However, the pseudo-solar furnace can indeed power most of the Gundam's equipment. Unfortunately, the result was still the same. I don't know. Harrow gave the answer again. Well, actually, Luca already knew the result after reviewing most of the materials. This question was nothing more than his desperate, last-ditch effort. Fine, we don't need these low-end goods anyway, Luca said through gritted teeth. At least with this information, I can say that my future is promising. Compared to other props, these materials from the Gundam Zero world allowed Luca to see a product that he could actually replicate. The only prerequisite is to land on Jupiter. Damn it, once I'm capable of landing on Jupiter, will I really need a second-generation Gundam? Thinking of this, Luca, feeling somewhat dejected, leaned back weakly in his chair, staring blankly at the basement ceiling. However, perhaps sensing Luca's disappointment, the orange Harrow, which had been quite lively just moments before, quickly rolled to the table, extended its omnidirectional mechanical arm, and gently tugged at Luca's sleeve. Don't be sad. Hello, awesome. Luca, who was pondering how far Orange Industries needed to develop before they could reach Jupiter, looked at Orange Harrow with some confusion upon hearing the voice. Then a brilliant idea flashed into my mind. Then, with a smack, he slapped his forehead hard. You idiot, Harrow is the key to the synthesis. Yes, Luca only then realized that the reason he cared so much about this synthesis was essentially because of the hints in the cheat code panel. Harrow possesses repair and manufacturing capabilities. He is an excellent mechanic in his own right. Unexpectedly, he forgot his original intention because he saw the groundbreaking technology about Gundam in the system data. In fact, with Harrow's manufacturing capabilities, even if they just pieced together the technologies from the Gundam Zero world, they might be able to create some groundbreaking new products. Moreover, given Luca's incredible abilities, there's no need to worry about not being able to access even more cutting-edge technological information in the future. What he truly lacks now is simply knowledge in the field of scientific research and the ability to develop and manufacture products. If it weren't for a lack of ability, simply understanding the production process of Big Hero 6 and creating a batch of intelligent robots would have been enough for Luca to solve most of the crises and even make a fortune. So, data is just the future. Right now, Harrow's development and manufacturing capabilities are the key. Luca, his interest rekindled, looked at the bouncy orange Harrow again and asked with great anticipation, Hello, can you make something? These 2 chapters contain some explanatory content to cater to readers who are unfamiliar with Gundam. But don't worry, to compensate those readers who have read Gundam, these 2 chapters are actually equivalent to 3 chapters in length. I only decided to publish it as 2 chapters because splitting it up would make it less coherent. End of this chapter, Chapter 63, Real Thighs Made by Hand. Chapter 63, Real Thighs Made by Hand. When Luca asked the question, Harrow did not answer with voice this time. Only a pair of beady eyes kept blinking. Immediately afterwards, a data stream swept across the computer screen in front of Luca, and a new screen appeared. Each of them displays something. E-carbon armor, Harrow robot, Harrow repair assist mech, Gundam pilot spacesuit, and a series of other props. However, Luca's vision went black upon seeing this. Isn't this the same stuff as before? However, as soon as the thought crossed his mind, he immediately realized that he had asked an idiotic question. Although Hello possesses highly advanced autonomous AI, it is essentially still just a maintenance robot. To create something, you definitely need relevant information. So he turned to ask Hello, who was standing next to him. Hello, if I give you the information on a certain item, can you help me manufacture it? Upon hearing Luca's question, the little guy rolled backward and looked up at the ceiling. Due to its physical structure, Luca couldn't tell at all whether it was expressing pride or rolling its eyes in mockery. However, the next moment, Orange Harrow suddenly leaped up, carrying the data cable connected to him, and slammed into Luca's arm again. Stupid Luca, stupid Luca. I see, he's disgusted with me, Luca thought to himself. However, despite its aggressive demeanor, the little thing actually crashed right into Luca's mechanical arm. Luca himself didn't react much, but Orange Harrow was thrown back with a bang and almost crashed into the computer screen behind him. Fortunately, since the data cable was still connected to the computer, the little gadget didn't fly very far. Like a tennis ball held in place by a rubber band, it bounced back. This time, Luca didn't even need to ask a question. Harrow, who had returned to the table, started muttering again. Support mech, support mech. Upon hearing this, Luca immediately understood what Harrow meant. Somewhat amused, I reached out and tugged at its two little arms that were sticking out from its spherical body. Haha, is it because it's inherently difficult to operate? Indeed, Harrow also has two mechanical arms. However, due to its design, its decorative and cute attributes may far outweigh its practicality. However, seeing that the little thing was about to get angry again, Luca decisively pressed it onto the table, preventing it from moving an inch, so that he could communicate with it harmoniously again. The next step is to talk to the Orange Hello, which is quite troublesome. However, Luca still managed to understand from it what conditions were needed for Harrow to help him develop and manufacture items. In summary, there are 3 points. First and foremost, Harrow should at least have a complete dedicated maintenance mech. After all, although Hello itself can connect to a computer, many devices still require manual operation, and Hello's short hands obviously cannot complete 2 complicated tasks. Moreover, this Harrow-specific maintenance mech can not only be remotely connected to the network to perform Harrow-free operation. It also comes with some small tools such as welding torches, wrenches, and screwdrivers. With it, Harrow can completely replace a seasoned mechanical engineer. If industrial production were to be carried out and the manufacturing scale expanded, this repair mech, working in conjunction with Harrow, would already be considered a well-coordinated mechanical engineering team. Yes, and the kind who's proficient in programming. Secondly, it involves generating data and establishing clear goals and directions. Although Hello has some independent manufacturing capabilities, it is essentially a small, intelligent robot designed to assist in research and development and maintenance. If Harlow's own database contains complete information about the items that need to be manufactured, then there's no need to say more. Or, to put it another way, if Harrow is just providing assistance to actual researchers during scientific research and development, there's probably no problem with that. However, if you want Harrow himself to be the main player, then Luca, that unreliable imposter, can't help much. Using incomplete information about items or even high-tech gadgets that Harrow's abilities couldn't comprehend, he analyzed and deduced to come up with effective manufacturing solutions. Therefore, Harlow needs to rely on its existing theoretical knowledge and greater AI computing power to perform analysis and combination. In other words, Harrow itself actually possesses a certain degree of creativity. However, this so-called creativity is actually more like a reasonable path provided by AI calculation and analysis. Speaking of computing power, we need to talk about the last condition for Haro to create items. That's the server that provides computing power. As an intelligent auxiliary robot, Hello's internal computing power is more than sufficient for tasks such as maintenance, operation, and interaction. After all, due to its cheat code, the small computing module inside Orange Haro already falls into the category of cutting-edge technology. However, when it comes to work involving research and development, creation, and deduction, Haro's own computing power is far from sufficient. In the original Gundam Zero universe, work involving this often requires Haro to connect to a larger external server for temporary upgrades. This is either supported by a massive quantum computing system like Veda or the ship's own core processor. The exact level of development efficiency depends on how much computing power Luca can provide to Haro. Otherwise, if Luca wanted Haro to piece together a moving humanoid mecha using the existing data and the technologies available in the Gundam Zero world, it would probably take several months for the little thing to crash. However, after finally figuring it out, Luca was already very satisfied with the Haro in front of him. It is estimated that for a considerable period of time to come, Haro's development and manufacturing capabilities will serve as the teacher and test taker for Luca, the imposter inventor. Furthermore, if we look at it this way, perhaps there's no need to go to Jupiter. Maybe, based on the Harlow calculations, it's not impossible to develop a pseudo-solar furnace. Of course, all of this is predicated on the premise that existing technology can indeed manufacture a quasi-solar furnace. However, Luca has not yet begun testing Haro's manufacturing capabilities. Instead, he calmed down and started looking again at the few items that Haro had mentioned earlier that he could currently create. The repair of the mechs has been mentioned before and needs no further explanation. The fact that Haro itself can produce more Haros also delighted Luca. It's still unclear how much ability these, cloned Haro, will have without the cheat code. However, I think it should be more than enough as a lab assistant. In addition, the complete Gundam pilot suit is actually a rather high-tech product, including a helmet, a tight-fitting spacesuit, a zero-gravity environment jetpack, and a personal pistol. However, these things are not considered important technologies for Luca, or rather, Orange Industries at present. It is estimated that it will not be truly useful until Orange Industries' commercial cooperation extends to the aerospace field in the future. If we had a way to send a PowerPoint presentation to the space agency, it wouldn't be impossible to sell a concept. In the very end, it was the E-carbon armor that Luca had previously overlooked because it lacked GN particles that caught his eye again. Indeed, a complete E-carbon armor needs to have GN particle capabilities to achieve a terrifying defensive capability that is almost immune to kinetic attacks. However, in reality, even without GN particles, the properties of E-carbon still far surpass those of most existing alloys. Density, toughness, hardness, high temperature resistance, corrosion resistance, energy conductivity, and even manufacturing cost. Taking all factors into account, this material completely surpasses existing materials in the field. In the original Gundam Zero universe, the reason why the three major powers on Earth were able to mass-produce humanoid mechs was essentially due to the existence of a material called E-carbon. Moreover, E-carbon is already widely used in the Gundam Zero world. Therefore, the information from all aspects is outrageously detailed. This stuff is actually somewhat similar to carbon fiber in essence. However, the excellent performance of carbon fiber is due to the interlacing of micron-sized carbon fiber tubes and the addition of composite materials for fixation. The material E-carbon is essentially a carbon nanotube made by chemically depositing and electromagnetically confining carbon isotopes, which autonomously arrange themselves into a special lattice structure, and then arrange them in a specific complex sequence. This manufacturing process also brings an advantage. Although they are all called E-carbon, it is actually a general term for a large class of materials. It can be combined with specific composite materials, or by reducing the density of carbon nanotubes. This will result in a large number of E-carbons with different strength properties. As long as Orange Industry can fully absorb the industrial production of E-carbon, Luca could even create E-carbon 1-16 or E-carbon Standard Edition, E-carbon Youth Edition, and E-carbon Pro Max by technically stripping the technology. Leveraging the superior performance of market-grade materials, they repeatedly exploit consumers by iterating their products. This single material was enough to make Orange Industries a commercial giant. It seems that Orange Industries now has at least a safety net for the future. No, it could even be a wholly owned subsidiary. Having figured all this out, Luca finally felt a huge weight lifted from his heart. However, still excited, he had no intention of resting. Instead, they took the newly born Orange Harrow and began building an auxiliary repair mech for it. Yes, of course, dreaming is wonderful and the future is bright. However, Luca is not yet capable of using such a luxury as E-carbon. Even for other components, they are piecing together readily available materials as much as possible. 3D printing, structural welding, and programming. Harrow, the real mechanic, takes charge of the command and the fine work, while Luca, the mediocre mechanic who only knows how to make toy robots, acts as a hand substitute for the big brother. Next, Luca, who was making props for the first time in a real sense, didn't leave the laboratory for 3 days and 3 nights. In the end, he actually managed to create a decent-looking Harlow-specific auxiliary repair mech all by himself. Looking at the creation he had painstakingly made from scratch, Luca felt an inexplicable surge of emotion that he could hardly contain, joy and a sense of accomplishment. It seems like becoming a real researcher, and mechanic wouldn't be bad at all. Before I knew it, a smile had crept onto my lips. End of this chapter. Chapter 64, New York, Turmoil. Chapter 64, New York. Turmoil, logically speaking, he was working at a high intensity for 3 days straight and getting less than 3 hours of sleep each day. Luca should have looked haggard, or at least physically tired. However, perhaps it was because the body was still very young, or perhaps it was simply the excitement of creating a finished product for the first time. At this moment, Luca still felt full of energy. However, just as he was about to try out the newly created auxiliary repair mech with Harlow and himself, outside the underground laboratory, Samira's voice could be heard asking questions. "Young master, breakfast is ready. You don't still want to eat in the lab, do you?" As they spoke, Samira's voice grew closer. Luca was slightly dazed for a moment, then immediately ran over to open the door for her. Looking back, I saw the completed mecha. There's no need to rush. He simply spoke directly to Samira. "Let's go upstairs and eat." After saying that, Luca, yawning, turned back to look at Harrow, who was still sitting in the auxiliary mech, and greeted him softly. "Come on, hello, let's come together." As soon as he finished speaking, Harrow, which was originally connected to the auxiliary mecha, immediately flapped its ears and stretched out its 2 short arms, applying slight force to the connecting parts on both sides. Immediately afterwards, there was a pop. Orange Harrow pulled itself off the mech's pilot seat as if it were a radish being pulled up. Then it hopped and skipped over to Luca's side. He bumped his head on his knee again. Stupid Luca, stupid Luca. The C***T is too small. The C***T is too small. Seeing the orange-clad Harrow angrily slamming into his knee, Luca simply ignored it and strode towards the stairs. In fact, this wasn't the first time Luca had made this kind of minor mistake during the production of the auxiliary mech these past few days. If Harlow hadn't been constantly observing and reminding me, it's questionable whether this piece would have ever been completed. Therefore, by this time, Luca had long been used to being frequently criticized by Harrow, his strict teacher. Samira, on the other hand, first looked at the spherical robot that was hopping and skipping after Luca with a strange expression, and then glanced at the messy state of the laboratory. He thought to himself with a strange feeling. When the young master invented those gadgets before, they weren't this complicated, were they? And why did it take so long this time? Could this pet toy ball be some kind of amazing invention? Although she had some doubts, Samira wasn't a particularly curious person. Besides, she didn't know much about these inventions and creations, so she simply followed Luca upstairs without saying a word. Upon arriving at the restaurant, I saw that the area around the tables was completely empty. Luca turned to Samira with some confusion and asked, "What about the rest?" Samira, who was still lost in thought, immediately spoke up upon hearing this. Dunshin took Green Bull and Wrench to exchange the bonds and gold bars they had collected from Kingpin for cash. When Kingpin was mentioned, Samira deliberately lowered her voice. Luca, however, didn't seem to mind. As for the gold bars and bonds that Samira mentioned, they refer to the things she found in that house after killing Kingpin. However, Luca didn't have time to examine it carefully until he returned. Besides gold bars and bearer bonds, which are probably kept as a small treasury for emergencies, there are other things inside. The most important item, however, was a USB drive containing damaging information about the New York police officers and officials that Kingpin had bribed. This contains substantial negative information about hundreds of people, ranging from municipal councilors and district judges to police detectives and prison guards. In retrospect, Luca realized that the information on the USB drive was perhaps far more important than the 10% stake he had originally wanted. However, Luca hasn't figured out yet how to make use of this resource. After all, these are all dirt. When they are actually used, while they may play a role, they may also immediately offend a group of big shots involved in the matter. For now, Luca can only keep these documents sealed away as a trump card. Let's return to the topic at the dinner table. After telling her where Dunshin and the other two had gone, Samira, who was about to speak, hesitated for a moment and then remained silent. Luca looked at him with slight surprise, but immediately understood what was going on. Thinking back to when we had dinner together a few days ago, Thresh kept his mouth buried in his food, not even lifting his head, as if afraid of being noticed by his socially awkward eating habits. And the image of Chang Gong setting out the food and raising a glass of red wine in self-pity. It seems unlikely that these two would want to dine with him without any other teammates present. So all these capable guys have some quirks, right? Luca shook his head with amusement, then reluctantly took his seat and began eating with Samira. Seeing this, Harlow rolled around on the ground out of boredom. Eat. Ignoring the gadget he was having so much fun with, Luca picked up the remote control on the table and turned on the morning news. As soon as the television screen lit up, the sweet news broadcast voice, carrying with it a sense of tension, immediately hit the screen. In recent days, the riots in New York City's Midwest have continued unabated, and the out-of-control situation is spreading to the entire Manhattan area at a visible speed. The female anchor's meticulously made-up face was filled with terror as the camera suddenly cut to a street scene billowing with thick smoke. Following yesterday's attack on Fifth Avenue Bank by alien weapons, this morning the Chase Manhattan branch on Wall Street was again blasted open by heavy fire. In just 5 days, there have been 3 major bank robberies. Thugs armed with alien weapons are constantly threatening the safety of New Yorkers. 3 armed robberies have occurred so far. 7 innocent civilians have been taken from us forever. Yet, even under such circumstances, a horrific incident occurred in Midtown Manhattan, where a white police officer on duty shot a black citizen. The camera focused on a black man who had been shot and was lying on the ground. The news anchor leaned forward, his tone full of accusation. "City Hall, what were our police doing when rioters were armed to the teeth with alien technology?" Now, I can't help but ask on behalf of those innocent citizens, New York Police Department, are you protectors or creators of chaos? The sound on the television paused slightly, and the female anchor took a few breaths, seemingly very angry, before finally speaking again. Next, let's connect with a survivor of the robbery at the Jingzhou branch. He learned from this. The sound continued, and the scene switched to an outdoor interview. However, Luca and Samira, who were having dinner, looked at each other in bewilderment. End of this chapter, Chapter 65, The Auburn Corporation, The Auburn Brothers. Chapter 65, The Auburn Corporation, The Auburn Brothers. the Midtown West mentioned on TV is actually the official name for Hell's Kitchen. However, Luca did not expect that the turmoil following Kingpin's death would spread so widely. These guys who escaped from Hell's Kitchen are starting to use Chitauri weapons. Looking at Samira, who was equally bewildered, neither of them had anticipated that the turmoil in Hell's Kitchen would be connected to the aftermath of the Battle of New York. I wonder which power will rise to power after this turmoil, and how it will end. However, Luca and Samira are not compassionate or benevolent people. Samira and her fellow Sokovian fighters were completely unconcerned about whether the American people would lose their peace because of their actions. Luca, a soul from another dimension, would not let the sins committed by those gangsters consume him. The two chatted casually for a few minutes before continuing to eat in peace. After breakfast, Samira originally wanted to suggest that Luca get some rest. However, Luca, who had just finished repairing Harrow's mech, was still in high spirits. He simply smiled and said, "I will sleep peacefully after I die," before preparing to return to the laboratory with the bouncy orange Harrow. However, at this moment, Samira suddenly remembered something and called out to Luca. "Young master, we've made progress on the person you asked me to investigate. The one who funded the establishment of the experimental treatment expert group at Wilhelm Hospital." Luca, who was about to leave, paused upon hearing this and turned back in confusion. Huh, isn't that so-called expert group just a smokescreen set up by Kingpin to bribe the attending physician? Yes, the day before he killed Kingpin, Luca had heard his mother Gina's attending physician mention in the hospital that Wilhelm Hospital was preparing to form an expert group to study the treatment of neural synaptic cocooning syndrome, and that Samira had indeed arranged to investigate the investors behind it. However, when his uncle was interrogated that night, the other party also said that Kingpin had previously bribed Gina's attending physician to extend the process of Luca inheriting the estate, in an attempt to create the illusion that Gina's condition still had hope of recovery. Therefore, Luca naturally assumed that the so-called expert treatment team was just an excuse made up by that unscrupulous doctor to buy time. After killing Kingpin, Luca completely forgot about the incident. Surprisingly, Samira not only remembered this incident, but she even managed to uncover some information about it. Upon hearing this, Samira's expression turned somewhat strange. After gathering her thoughts, she explained, "Actually, this is what he found out from the doctor who took bribes when you asked Green Bull to threaten and deal with him. It's true that Kingpin bribed him, but the expert treatment team is also real. He was just a..." Samira paused slightly, unsure of what to say. Luca then followed up with, taking advantage of the situation, taking advantage of the opportunity to swindle Kingpin. Samira, yes, that's it. Luca was speechless upon hearing this. It seems even an insignificant person has their own little schemes. Seeing that Luca understood what she meant, Samira continued. According to that Dr. West, the expert group was actually sponsored by a company called Auburn Biotechnology. It's a newly established biopharmaceutical company that was founded just last year. You probably haven't heard of it, young master. However, this company has a very large registered capital, and its predecessor, Osborne Biological Laboratory, is very famous in the biomedical field in New York. The two founders, Dr. Norman Osborne and Dr. Otto Gunther Octavius, one was an expert in biological genetics, and the other was an expert in neurology and mechanical engineering. They were very influential in the medical community and were known as the Osborne brothers. What? In fact, Luca was already stunned and frozen in place when Samira was only halfway through her sentence. How could he not have heard of the famous Osborne group? Justies, they're a green goblin in the MCU. However, Luca immediately realized that the world he was in was not exactly the same as the MCU. It was just that there were too many similarities, which made him have similar illusions. Even so, the remaining content was enough to shatter his previous understanding. It's one thing that Osborne was just founded, but why was it founded by Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus? And the Osborne brothers? Is Dr. Octopus really that powerful? Leaving aside Luca, who was still stunned and shocked, Samira was still recounting the information that Green Bull had obtained from Dr. West. Previously, the experimental treatment group was able to be established because Norman Osborn, the founder of Osborn Biotechnology, used his own funds and connections to make connections. However, even Dr. West didn't know the specific reasons why Norman Osborn did this. I only learned through some rumors that Norman Osborn's wife seems to suffer from a rare genetic disease. Originally, because the number of people with this disease was so rare, Osborn could only rely on his own laboratory to research treatment methods. However, after the Battle of New York, a large number of patients with similar symptoms to the lady appeared. Although the two are not the same disease, the actual symptoms are very similar. That's why Osborn thought of forming an expert group to conduct trials on patients who couldn't afford treatment or had given up on treatment, in order to find possible treatment options. Well, now Luca is even more confused. He never expected that the person in this world suffering from a genetic disease was not from the Osborn family, but Norman Osborn's wife, and that her genetic disease was even similar to the symptoms of his mother Gina's neural synaptic cocooning syndrome. However, these shocks only flashed through Luca's mind quickly. No matter what the world is like, its existence is its own justification. This, on the contrary, made him think quickly. Perhaps this is actually good news for me. Previously, because my family lacked connections in the biomedical field, we couldn't find a partner pharmaceutical lab to develop a specific targeted drug for Gina's treatment. Perhaps Norman Osborn would be a good partner. Moreover, Luca also thought of something else. Osborn appears to be a relatively new company, and although it has a good reputation in the biomedical field, it is ultimately just a startup. But Luca knew that the other party was very likely to gradually develop into an industry giant, just like the Osborn Group in other parts of the world. If I were to cooperate with them now, would I be able to get a share of the profits? Thinking of this, a white light flashed across Luca's glasses. He looked up at Samira and said calmly, "Aunt Samira, please help me get in touch with Mr. Norman, the founder of Osborn Biotechnology. Just tell him that I have a drug that can treat synaptic cocooning syndrome. Let me explain, this isn't something I made up for the sake of the plot." Whispering, at least not entirely. Norman's wife has a hereditary disease, and he and Dr. Octopus Otto were college friends who co-founded the Osborn Corporation, earning them the nickname Otto's Duo. These are all plot points from the game Marvel's Spider-Man. Actually, as many viewers may have noticed from the earlier section about Kingpin, some of Kingpin's design elements are taken from this game. Of course, this worldview isn't just about the MCU plus Marvel's Spider-Man. There will be others to come. Don't worry, everyone. I will try my best to integrate myself into the main storyline. End of this chapter, Chapter 66, Combination Techniques. Chapter 66, Combination Techniques. The unrest in New York was just a sideshow for Luca. A partnership with Osborn is a matter for later. Luca is currently planning to return to the lab, hoping to create a new product for his company to showcase at the upcoming board meeting. After all, Luca has already begun legal proceedings to hold the shares held by Gina on her behalf, and has also transferred the 10% of shares that Kingpin originally coerced into his own name. However, absolute controlling stake does not mean absolute control over the company. There is no effective future plan that can turn Orange Industries back into a profitable company. Orange Industries will face a host of challenges, including shareholder withdrawal, partnership termination, retailers ceasing to purchase from them, and even a mass exodus of capable employees. Therefore, if Luca wants to continue to have Orange Industries as a valuable asset in the future, getting the company back on track as soon as possible is the top priority. Regarding this point, Luca already has a pretty good idea. However, before that, he needs a little help from Big White. Get to work, get to work. Luca kicked Harrow, who was rolling around beside him, and watched as the little creature angrily bumped into his knee. He then smiled and walked upstairs to the villa. On the second floor of the villa, there is a spacious bedroom facing the sun. Inside the bedroom, Baymax was obediently standing on the red storage box by the wall, charging himself. Luca casually greeted it and then asked a question. "Big White, how is Gina doing now?" Yes, with the Kingpin affair over, Luca has brought his mother Gina back home. With an effective treatment plan and excellent health care already in place, Luca naturally saw no need to keep Gina in the hospital any longer. And our agent Baymax has finally returned to his original job. Upon hearing Luca's question, Baymax, who had been given a new skin, was immediately awakened from charging. He glanced at the little orange thing rolling around Luca's feet with some confusion, but immediately answered Luca's question. The patient had just finished morning care at 6:00 a.m. and had their IV fluids changed. Their condition is currently very stable. It is recommended to provide the patient with medication as soon as possible, which can effectively help her recover her health sooner. Luca was not surprised by this. After quietly observing Gina lying on the bed as if she were merely asleep, he turned to the main topic. "Big White, let me introduce you. This is our new partner, Hello." As he spoke, Luca nudged the restless Harrow with his toe. "Come on, Hello, this is Baymax. Say hello." This time, perhaps it was the presence of Baymax, an intelligent robot he had never seen before, that piqued Harlow's curiosity. The little thing ignored Luca kicking it twice more, and instead rolled over to Big White with a gurgle sound, making a kind of happy electronic sound. "Marshmallow, marshmallow." As he spoke, Harlow leaped up amidst Big White's somewhat puzzled gaze, bumping headfirst into Big White's chubby white belly. However, the inflated white body is naturally very elastic. The orange hello was immediately bounced away like a ball after being bumped into. Fortunately, Big White was quick-witted and nimble-fingered. Before the little thing could be thrown far, he reached out and grabbed it. Then, the two intelligent robots stared at each other quietly. Black circle, stare, finally, it was Big White who spoke first. "Hello, I'm Big White, your Luca's personal healthcare partner." Hello. Huh, well, Harrow's way of greeting him seems to have made Big White even more confused. But since the two guys have already greeted each other, Luca simply gave the order. Big White tried to connect to Hello. Hello, do not resist. With Luca's highest authority issuing the order, Baymax, who was already holding Harlow in its arms, immediately activated its unreasonable ability to connect to the network simply by touching it. Connection established successfully. After hearing Big White's answer, Luca continued. "Hello, try to access computing power. Report on the available computing power for building the data model." The next moment, the eyes of the two intelligent robots began to flash simultaneously, as if they were trying to process information. Immediately afterwards, Orange Hello provided the answer. "Activate computing power. Activate computing power. Gained basic server privileges. Gained basic server privileges." Luca was delighted upon hearing this. Really? In fact, Luca had guessed before that even though Baymax usually seems a bit dull and silly, but as a cutting-edge intelligent robot, with the help of super scanners, it can scan an entire city to select target individuals, or it can directly analyze various indicators at the cellular level of the human body. Its scanner and internal server computing chip are actually cutting-edge technologies that are as black as can be. Don't be fooled by Harrow's assessment that it's only basic scale. However, that was actually a comparison with the super quantum computer, Veda, in the Gundam Zero universe. In the real world, this basic scale already falls under the category of enterprise-level computing servers, and may even exceed the large-scale experimental servers deployed in Orange County. As for national-level computing centers, even with Luca's current capabilities, it's impossible to achieve that, let alone quantum computers. Seeing that Harlow could indeed draw upon a basic level of computing power from Big White, Luca decisively gathered two other guys and prepared to go back into the lab. "Come on, Big White, follow me. Let's go get something new." However, before stepping out of the bedroom, Luca paused slightly and turned to look at Big White. "Will Gina be okay if you leave here?" Following closely behind Luca, the big white dog, who almost bumped into him, tilted its head and replied matter-of-factly. "Today's morning treatment is over, but it's not time for the evening body cleansing and muscle massage yet. Does Luca want me to stay here with him? Upon hearing this, Luca breathed a slight sigh of relief and greeted him with a smile. Let's go then. Inside the underground laboratory. After reconnecting Big White and Harrow, Luca himself took out the Dominator pistol from his waist and placed it on the experimental table. He opened his mouth and gave orders to the two artificial intelligences after they merged. Big White scan and analyze this pistol and share the data with Harlow. Hello, utilize Big White's server computing power to build a pistol structural model, simulate the manufacturing process, and replan a feasible solution. As the scanning red light shot out from Big White's eyes, Harrow's beady eyes also began to blink at the same time. At that moment, Luca's lips were visibly curled upwards. Haha, this is our combined attack. End of this chapter, Chapter 67, The Dominator Beta 11. Chapter 67, The Dominator Beta 1.1, another few busy days have passed. In fact, even though Luca was still young at this time, his body was already showing signs of strain. After all, it involves not only high-intensity mental activity, but also physical exertion and fine motor skills. If Luca hadn't frequently used sweet Captive's healing ability to relieve the soreness in his muscles and eyes, he probably would have already gone to rest and slept all day. During this time, not only Samira, but even Big White reminded Luca to take care of his health several times, but he still managed to hold on thanks to his excitement. Finally, looking at this energy pistol, which was identical in appearance to the original Dominator, but completely different in its internal workings, Luca finally showed a satisfied smile. Next, we need to find a place to test this brand new Dominator. Given the power possessed by the Dominator, Luca would naturally not choose to conduct the test in his own small private laboratory. However, even without conducting actual tests, he already had a general understanding of the various data of this brand new weapon. In fact, this Dominator Beta 1.1 is a knockoff product pieced together by analyzing the original Dominator and combining it with existing technical information in the database. However, Orange Industries already had experience in developing ion energy guns, in addition to some peripheral technologies from the Gundam Zero world. The final product is very close to the original Dominator. It not only possesses 3 form transformations similar to the original Dominator, but also has 70–80% of its power. Even additional features such as network connectivity, voice recognition, and facial data retrieval have been perfectly replicated. The only 2 things that are a little regrettable. First, the original version's aiming aids, which could be projected onto the eyes at all times, and even the information prompts, were something that even with Harrow's abilities, he couldn't integrate into Dominator Beta 1.1. Ultimately, the only solution was to use an external device, similar to the Dragon Ball Power Level Detector. Well, this external glasses is actually a part of the technology that was disassembled from the tracking glasses that Baymax scanned later. However, the technology behind the tracking glasses is actually far more shady than it appears. Forget about copying it. After all that effort, they only managed to extract a few scattered bits of useful technology. Another aspect that couldn't perfectly replicate the original was the ultra-small energy battery on the Dominator. According to Harlow's simulations, the battery wear caused by electromagnetic anesthesia in non-lethal mode and ion beam in lethal mode is essentially within an acceptable range. However, the high-energy melting energy ball condensed in the last and decomposition mode, the melting mode, is basically enough to deplete 1 battery and render 2 batteries unusable with current battery technology. Unlike the original Luca, which could fire a dozen or more shots in a row before running out of power and could be recharged and reused repeatedly. Even this crippled battery was obtained by reverse engineering the lithium batteries inside the 2 intelligent robots, Baymax and Harrow. That's why it's often said that the most darkened of these high-tech gadgets is energy technology. The data stored in the Harrow chip mostly requires a solar furnace to be realized, and the achievements in battery technology are pitifully small. But, in Luca's opinion, this second unexpected flaw actually suited his taste even better. Perhaps it is because they have been corrupted by these evil capitalists. Luca's first thought was not to continue improving and upgrading, but to have Harlow change the battery of Dominator Beta 1.1 to a removable and replaceable type. Moreover, he even intentionally compressed some of the battery's performance so that even when Dominator Beta 1.1 uses ion beams in lethal mode, it will still cause some degree of permanent damage to the energy battery. Furthermore, Luca thoughtfully had Harlow add a line of code indicating the degree of battery damage to the accompanying glasses software. This is to ensure that future buyers will not lose their user experience due to severe battery damage. How much money can you make selling handguns? Once the handguns are sold, do you expect the power company to make money off the ammunition? Moreover, Luca is also planning to launch a long-term battery recycling program with rebates. The goal is to return those permanently damaged batteries to the factory, refurbish them, and resell them. Yes, it's a rebate, not a trade-in discount after all, if the damaged battery is simply discounted when buying a new battery. Then it only saves the purchaser money. If there are rebates, it will be easier for those Smith specialists to scrap old batteries for profit, and then they will be more proactive in purchasing new batteries. Now that we have our flagship product, the next step is to figure out the sales channels. It's time to go back to the company and meet with those people again. We should at least get those shareholders and sales staff to do something. However, Luca already had a good buyer in mind. The military is proving to be a difficult party to deal with for the time being. When they need to procure new weapons, the review process is often very complicated. Even conceptual technology demonstrations must be approved by the defense agency and undergo budget review by Congress. Moreover, Orange Industries had very few connections with the military because it had focused too much on contract manufacturing. So this time Luca is targeting another armed group. As a local agency, the NYPD's procurement plans and budget allocations are much faster. Ultimately, Luca prioritized dealing with the replication of the Dominator and even thoughtfully retained the non-lethal mode because he was targeting the recently infamous New York police. Heh, the gangsters are all armed with alien energy weapons now. How can those officials bear to let these brave police officers fight them with ordinary firearms? Moreover, as long as they can secure the New York Police Department's procurement order first. Are police officers in other states just going to stand by and watch their colleagues in New York State use equipment that is several times more advanced than theirs? But not before that. I should get some sleep first. As he spoke, Luca, finally able to relax, didn't even move a step and fell asleep directly on the carpet in the underground laboratory. Harrow, who had been operating the equipment on the auxiliary mech, saw Luca fall into a deep sleep and immediately and carefully, and gently pulled himself out of the mech and leaned against Luca. Meanwhile, Big White silently walked over to Luca and gently picked him up. They carefully carried it upstairs to the large bed in the bedroom. End of this chapter, Chapter 68, The Current State of Industry in Orange. Chapter 68, The Current State of Industry in Orange Industrial, a weapons testing ground in the suburbs. In fact, this place is less like a weapons testing ground and more like a banquet party. Apart from the vast, empty testing area that occupied most of the test site, and all sorts of equipment that outsiders couldn't understand at all. Nearly a third of the venue was furnished, with very ornate long tables for cold dishes. Waiters in tailcoats bustled about, while guests of all kinds, dressed in expensive clothes, were scattered around the long table in twos and threes, raising their wine glasses and chatting amongst themselves. The current scene, compared to the somewhat empty weapons testing ground next to it, gives people an inexplicable sense of incongruity. These people include investor representatives, small shareholders with individual shareholdings, and senior veterans within the company. In essence, they are all considered insiders of Orange Industries. However, these very same people, right here on Orange Industries turf, were discussing Luca, the company's successor, without any restraint. Tusk, I originally thought the Orange family kid would be more like Ms. Gina, but who knew he would insist on learning from Herman and getting some kind of energy gun. He would be better off using this time to build a stronger relationship with Stark Industries. Who knows, the company might start turning a profit tomorrow. The speaker was just a tiny shareholder of Orange Industries, with no powerful background, but that didn't stop him from looking down on Luca. In fact, he is not the only shareholder with similar characteristics. Don't underestimate these minority shareholders just because they hold a small number of shares, perhaps less than 20% in total. If they really team up to cause trouble, they have plenty of ways to ruin things. Of course, nobody would turn down money. If the leaders of Orange Industries could expand the company and increase the value of their shares, they would definitely be among the first to align themselves with them. However, even among minority shareholders, opinions differ. A middle-aged gentleman with a few gray hairs at his temples glanced at the speaker and said softly, "And don't underestimate this young master of the Orange family. As far as I know, the shares he holds now weren't inherited. He can kill his own uncle whenever he wants." Tusk. Upon hearing this, several people around turned to look at him. Clearly, many people are still unaware of this news. Counselor Connor came here specifically because he received some information, didn't he? The middle-aged gentleman, when asked, wore a mysterious expression, carefully choosing his tone before sharing the information he had gathered from his friend. This Representative Connor is from Tennessee and is now a state legislator for Tennessee. Although the Orange Industrial Headquarters were located in New York, for cost reasons, the large factories were located in Tennessee, a Central American state with convenient transportation and low labor costs. Congressman Connor received a small number of company shares in his capacity as an industrial consultant for Orange. Similarly, there was a retired Army procurement director and a retired Marine Corps Special Forces advisor. These retired veterans who receive stock dividends or consultant salaries are actually quite common in various American arms companies. They usually only make occasional appearances to provide policy guidance or introduce connections. However, those two did not belong to the small circle they were currently gathered together. After hearing the news shared by Congressman Connor, the people around him either looked puzzled or lowered their heads in thought. It's unclear who was the first to sigh. Sigh if Ms. Gina hadn't fallen into a coma, things wouldn't be like this now. The man paused slightly, then shook his head helplessly. For some reason, the others also let out a tacit sigh. The reason these people sighed was certainly not because they were worried about Luca's current situation. They were more concerned about the company's future than pitying a young man who had inherited a huge fortune. In this regard, Luca's mother, Gina, enjoys a high degree of trust among these shareholders and even among the employees of Orange Industries. This is why the initial shareholder preferred Luca to be like Gina rather than Herman. The reason why most of these people have not yet sold their shares and why Orange Industries has not yet fallen apart is because of this. Aside from Lucana's alleged ambiguous relationship with Stark Industries, the more important reason might be that he still hopes Gina will awaken and regain control of Orange Industries. In fact, Orange Industries doesn't have much to offer right now. Apart from some civilian home weapons manufactured to enrich the product line, which can only get scraps from major established military industries. Orange Industries' core business can be roughly divided into three parts. Firstly, it was also the main business of Orange Industries. It is the Smart Chip Kit that was once outsourced to Stark Industries and Hammer Industries. The intelligence mentioned here is certainly not the kind of AI butler like Jarvis, created by Tony Stark himself. Instead, it is a modular chip that integrates multiple intelligent components, such as an intelligent ballistic aiming module, an intelligent voice recognition module, and a lightweight intelligent weapon control module. Compared to the intelligent systems of other large companies in the same industry, Orange Industries' intelligent system portfolio has the advantage of modularity and low cost. The former was Stark Industries' core requirement for secondary weapons component suppliers, while the latter is the corporate philosophy that Hammer Industries has always pursued. However, with both orders now falling through, Orange Industries is facing a severe overcapacity in this area, and many of its customized production lines have been shut down. This is also one of the main reasons why Orange Industries is now on the verge of bankruptcy. Orange Industries' second signature product is the combat drone that the company began developing in-house several years ago. In fact, the development of the combat drone project has always been strongly advocated by Luca's mother, Gina. Initially, it was because Gina had her own battlefield experience and her judgment on the development of the military industry. The goal is to develop combat drones into Orange Industries' flagship product for the future, thereby breaking free from the situation where they can only rely on large military enterprises for parts manufacturing. This also prevents Hammer Industries from one day abandoning its weapons division, which could plunge Orange Industries into crisis. Furthermore, Orange Industries' existing Intelligent Combat System module was highly compatible with drone warfare itself, and the company had ample funds at the time. The future of all this should have been very bright. End of this chapter, Chapter 69, Hammer Industries, Regenerative Capital. Chapter 69, Hammer Industries, Regenerative Capital. Unfortunately, the development of the combat drone was only halfway done when Tony Stark intervened again. As the largest source of funding for Orange Industries, Justin Hammer, the founder of Hammer Industries, was imprisoned on the spot, and Hammer Industries itself was liquidated and divided, almost going bankrupt before Orange Industries. This directly led to the drone project almost being aborted. The development process was fraught with difficulties and lasted for a year, although the combat drone was eventually launched. However, this flagship product, which Gina had placed high hopes on, could only serve as Orange Industries' last lifeline, barely keeping the company from bankruptcy and preventing it from expanding further. As for the end, naturally, it is the core component of Luca's Dominator pistol, the ion confinement pistol. Perhaps it stems from the romanticism of being a scientific researcher and developer. Unlike Gina's choice of combat drones, based on the company's existing resources and market assessment. As the core head of the research department at Orange Industrial, Luca's father, Herman, aspired to create a truly groundbreaking science fiction weapon. It must possess both the excellent aesthetics of traditional weapons and the futuristic core essence of science fiction works. The ion confinement pistol, a powerful energy weapon, was clearly exactly what Herman wanted. Of course, Herman wasn't blindly pursuing romance. Otherwise, Gina wouldn't have agreed to allocate funds for research and development. Compared to combat drones, if an ion confinement pistol with combat capabilities can be successfully developed, then similar products such as rifles, submachine guns, and sniper rifles could also bring a larger industrial market to Orange Industries. Moreover, this high-end-looking weapon is a very attractive selling point, whether in order to negotiate orders or investments, and it is also more likely to save Orange Industries from the embarrassing situation of being on the verge of bankruptcy. It could even be used to modify drones, potentially boosting drone sales significantly. Unfortunately, as it turns out, Herman's achievements in high-energy physics were clearly somewhat inferior to his achievements in electrical engineering and programming algorithms. Since Orange Industries was unable to recruit researchers of his caliber who could collaborate with him on research and development, the ion confinement pistol remained merely an excellent toy confined to the laboratory. Extremely high manufacturing costs, short ion confinement distance, poor energy conversion rate, and all sorts of other problems were not fully resolved by Herman before his death. This is why, although these people have come to observe the weapons test, most of them are not optimistic about the new firearms that Luca mentioned. While these people were chatting about gossip and their experiences from all over the world, a few more people walked towards us from a distance along the long corridor connecting to the weapons testing range. Among these people, The two walking at the front were clearly the leaders. However, one of them was a young woman who looked to be only around 20 years old. The woman was wearing a bright red dress, had dark brown curly hair, exquisite and beautiful features, and a sharp, edgy aura. He always walks with his chin slightly raised, giving him an aloof and unapproachable air from a distance. Her every move suggested that she was the master of the place, and that she was only there to attend a banquet for guests. The newcomer's demeanor naturally attracted the attention of most people. However, many people were not admiring the newcomer's beauty. Instead, they frowned slightly. Why is she here too, and who is this? A few people who did not recognize the woman in red immediately whispered to those around them and asked, "Who else could it be? The current head of Hammer Industries, of course. He hasn't even finished cleaning up his own company's mess, yet he has the nerve to attend Orange Industries' internal testing meeting. Oh, she's the heiress of Hammer Industries, Justin Hammer." Yes, the person who came was Justin Hammer, the daughter of Justin Hammer, the former founder of Hammer Industries. In the past, during the heyday of Hammer Industries, although it was far behind Stark Industries, ordinary people would not have dared to talk so casually about Justin Hammer's daughter, let alone the person in charge of Hammer Industries. However, since Justin was arrested and imprisoned 2 years ago, Hammer Industries has been divided up by major competitors and the government and military, and its former power is no longer what it used to be. Although Justin Jr., whose name differs from his father's by only one letter, later returned from overseas and took over the company again. Because of her remarkable abilities and skills, coupled with her beautiful appearance, she was once very famous. Ultimately, however, when surrounded by wolves, capability no longer plays a decisive role in the situation facing Hammer Industries. For the next 2 years, Hammer Industries continued to decline rapidly. It was only thanks to Justin Timberlake's efforts that Hammer Industries avoided bankruptcy that it was able to stay afloat. And afterwards, few people paid attention to Hammer Industries' movements. Of course, even a fallen camel is bigger than a horse. After all, it was once a large military-industrial group worth tens of billions. Even though it has declined to this day, it is still not something Orange Industries can mess with. The reason why people from Hammer Industries are here. That's because when Orange Industries became a secondary supplier to Hammer Industries, it gave up some of its shares to Hammer Industries in order to allow Hammer Industries to manage its downstream industries. Stark Industries may look down on these practices, but in reality, they are quite common in other large companies. However, both companies later ran into bad luck and were too busy taking care of themselves. Although Hammer Industries has always remained the third largest shareholder of Orange Industries, behind Gina and Herman, it has never participated in any of Orange's decision-making processes in the past 2 years. As for why Justin Hammer, who once stirred up trouble in the industry and gave Hammer Industries a last chance to breathe, would personally come here today, no one else present really knew. As for the middle-aged man who followed Justin, always half a step behind. Despite his ordinary appearance, gentle smile, and humble demeanor, he seemed to be just a butler or waiter. But in reality, the others present were more familiar with him. Heinrich von Stein, Orange Industries' fourth largest shareholder, representing Regenerative Capital. Venture capital firms that invested shortly after Orange Industrial landed in the United States. Orange Industries experienced several ups and downs during this period, and the venture capital firm's shareholding also fluctuated, but it always maintained its position as an important shareholder. Although Regenerative Capital is not well known in the United States, it is actually very influential in Europe, or more precisely, Eastern Europe. Orange Industries' current sales of military drones are largely due to orders secured by this investor's representative through connections. It can be said that the other party is one of the important pillars that have enabled Orange Industries to survive until now. End of this chapter, Chapter 70, The Strange Core Components. Chapter 70, The Strange Core Components, third update, just as everyone's attention was focused on Justin Hammer and Heinrich, who had just arrived. A clear and cheerful voice, characteristic of youth, came from the other side. "I'm sorry, I should have gone out to greet you both personally when you arrived. I was just adjusting the equipment and was about to leave when I didn't expect you to arrive already." Luca, dressed in a sharp suit, strode toward the two of them, his face beaming with a friendly smile. However, Justin's expression remained unchanged when he saw Luca approaching. After scrutinizing Luca with a somewhat enigmatic look, he nodded coolly. Without saying a word, he adopted an attitude that kept people at arm's length. This attitude puzzled Luca, who wondered what the other party was thinking and why they had to make a special trip to visit the internal test. Heinrich, standing next to Justin, was quite enthusiastic towards Luca. With a gentle smile, he took 2 steps forward, patted Luca's shoulder lightly, and said with some emotion, "Not so polite. I have always had a good personal relationship with your parents. I was unable to attend Herman's funeral, and I should be the one apologizing to you." Heinrich spoke very gently, appearing as an elder who felt guilty and cared for Luca. This perfectly matches the enthusiastic attitude that Luca has shown. However, at this moment, Luca looked at Heinrich with a strange expression and even hesitated slightly when he tried to say something. Although he immediately concealed it without making a sound, Heinrich, who was standing right in front of him, naturally couldn't miss it. He touched his slightly wrinkled cheek with a strange expression and asked Luca with a hint of embarrassment, "Is there something on my face?" As he spoke, he deliberately glanced at Justin Hammer beside him and said in a somewhat teasing tone, "Why didn't Miss Hammer remind me of this along the way?" Justin's attitude towards Heinrich was noticeably better. Although he knew Heinrich was just joking, he still responded cooperatively. "Nothing was stuck on. I think Mr. Orange was just a little distracted by seeing you, an elder he hadn't seen in a long time." Luca, quickly regaining his composure, decisively followed the lead Justin Hammer had given him and continued speaking. It has indeed been a while since I last saw Uncle Heinrich. I remember it was at the Orange dinner a year ago." Hearing Luca address him as uncle, Heinrich's smile deepened, and he even joked about himself. "Haha, I never thought that an old man like me would be more eye-catching than a beauty like Miss Hammer. This kind of thing happened back to my college prom. I'm getting old. I used to be a big shot in the fraternity." Upon hearing this, the people nearby smiled and offered compliments in response. Justin Hammer simply covered his mouth and chuckled softly. Luca then brought these people to the table at the opportune moment. "Uncle Heinrich and Miss Hammer, you may rest here for a while. Please excuse me. The preparations over there are almost complete, and the next part of the presentation should be able to begin soon." With that, Luca left with a hint of apology on his face, and the others naturally didn't say anything more about it. However, after Luca left, Justin Hammer took 2 steps back, distancing himself slightly from the others, and whispered to Heinrich beside him, "What do you think? Didn't you guys think highly of him? Why don't you talk to him more?" Heinrich's gentle smile remained unchanged, and he even picked up a wine glass and waved to the other guests he knew in the distance. However, his tone was far less enthusiastic than before, instead becoming eerily calm. A few words can't tell anything. Ultimately, we'll have to see how the product is tested later. Moreover, it's not that I think highly of him. It's just that those who think highly of him need me to observe and evaluate his qualifications." As they were talking, several guests who recognized them came over from a distance with their wine glasses to greet them. The 2 men immediately shut up, as if their previous conversation had never happened. In fact, Luca, who was walking away in the distance, no longer had the politeness he had shown earlier. It's not that Luca noticed their previous disguise, but he did notice it. However, in the business world, it's perfectly normal for people to wear a mask of pretense when communicating with each other. So that's not what Luca cares about. It happened just now. Only after getting closer to the 2 did Luca realize that Heinrich, the investor's representative, was an old acquaintance of his parents. The left eye area was emitting a faint white fluorescence. Yes, Luca wasn't looking at the other person's face at all. His gaze was completely drawn to the white glowing left eye. Moreover, judging from the attitudes of others, Such a white light clearly does not exist in their eyes. Luca was all too familiar with this situation. What's going on? The human eyeball can be considered a core component. What are they going to synthesize? They can't just create something like a warlock's eye, a mere artifact of flesh and blood, can they? As Luca walked toward the equipment room at the edge of the field, all sorts of random thoughts flashed through his mind, but he quickly came to his senses. Is that guy's left eye some kind of prosthetic eye? Luca carefully recalled the scene just now, and it seemed that only the white light was emanating from the other person's left eyeball, and even the parts covered by the upper and lower eyelids were perfectly normal. This is why Luca only noticed the white light in the other person's eyes after he got close. Just like when the core components of the tracking glasses were discovered earlier, Luca was completely unaware of them as long as they were placed in the glasses case. When the other person smiled, they squinted, making the white light in their eyes even less noticeable. But I've never heard of Heinrich injuring his left eye before. Heinrich's claim that he knew Luca's parents was true. As friends of over a decade, if this were true, Gina and Herman would likely know something about it. And how realistic is it? Are they really fake eyes? Unfortunately, Big White is still at home in the villa taking care of Gina, and wasn't with Luca today. He himself couldn't very well go up to the other person and ask, "May I touch your eyes?" to trigger the cheat menu. It's unlikely that we'll be able to figure out why the other person's left eye was identified as a core component by the cheat system in the short term. Luca could only make a note of this for now. After all, the most important thing today is to display the weapons. This next chapter might be a bit weak too, but I'll release it all together anyway. That's settled then. There's nothing I can do about the water. I can only rely on the quantity. It will be available for purchase soon, and then I can update it more freely. I have some good news. I'll be appearing on Sanjeong next week. Thank you all for your continued support. End of this chapter. Chapter 71, The Order Keepers. Chapter 71, The Order Keepers, 4th update, cough 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 tilde. The microphone was very ordinary, but Luca's voice was clear and bright. I think everyone is clear about the purpose of inviting you all here today. At this moment, Luca was standing in the middle of the weapons testing range in front of a bunch of strange data collection devices, looking at everyone with a relaxed expression. Thanks to the waiter's reminder, everyone who had been chatting at the open-air party had quieted down and was waiting for Luca's performance. Although many of these people, not just shareholders, but even the core veterans of the company, were not very optimistic about the project Luca mentioned. However, since they are all one of us, no one would actively jump out to cause trouble or show off their presence at such a moment. Everyone was indeed curious to see what kind of tricks this heir to the House of Orange would pull. I'm sure many of you here know more about the current state of Orange Industries than I, as the new leader, do. This is an internal demonstration, so I won't go through any cliché opening remarks. Let's get straight to the formal testing and introduction. Upon hearing this, everyone nodded in satisfaction, and many even showed encouraging smiles and applauded lightly. Ultimately, Luca is just a successor, and he's too young to have truly established his authority. If Luca were to try to inspire these old guys with ideas about the future or instill ideologies under these circumstances, he would only become a laughingstock. On the contrary, this pragmatic style inherited from Gina has won the favor of some people. Justin Hammer, dressed in red, also clapped with a smile, but spoke with a hint of pride to Heinrich beside him. Now comes the real test. We'll see if this guy is as good as the person behind you says. Heinrich, standing to the side, showed no change in expression upon hearing this, except for a barely perceptible flash of red light in his left eye. Many people in the audience, like Justin, were talking quietly, but this had no effect on Luca on stage. Putting down the microphone, Luca waved to the wrench next to him. The wrench, who had been eagerly waiting, excitedly ran over with the square black briefcase in his hand, opened it, and placed it on the table. Inside is, of course, Luca's self-developed Dominator Beta 1.2 pistol. That's right, it's Dominator Beta 1, 2. In fact, Luca hadn't just been sitting idly by waiting for his men to prepare for this internal exhibition. During this period, he spent a lot of time with Harlow researching which part of the technology in this knockoff Dominator could be encrypted in a black box to prevent it from being cracked, which parts are more suitable for patent registration, and which can be selectively disclosed. In fact, Luca only learned in the last few days that patent registration itself requires detailed disclosure of the technical solution, including core principles, implementation steps, and other information, in order to be truly protected. However, this behavior is often the root cause of the exposure of core technologies. Therefore, some large enterprises, especially those in the military technology field, are willing to risk having their technology cracked and their patents reverse registered. Some companies choose to refuse to register patents, relying more on physical means to keep their core product technologies confidential. Yeah, of course. In this Marvel universe, if some geniuses really want to crack your technology, they won't listen to any logic. However, these true geniuses are unlikely to apply these groundbreaking technologies to the business world, so there's no need to worry too much about it. And even if everything goes very smoothly from now on, from receiving an order to improving the factory production line, and finally to actual production and sales, it will still take considerable time. Therefore, Luca can certainly continue to further weigh and improve the aspects of encryption and manufacturing costs. That's enough about that. At this moment, Luca calmly took the Dominator Beta 1.2 out of the black briefcase and displayed it flat in his palm. Of course, Luca's actions made it impossible for everyone present to see the weapon clearly. Luca raised his hand, grabbed at the Dominator Beta 1.2 pistol in midair, and then tossed it forward. The next moment, blue light flashed on several machines next to him. Immediately afterwards, a full-scale projection, identical to the gun in Luca's hand, but magnified several times, rapidly materialized out of thin air in front of everyone. Holographic projection technology, even with lag-free touch operation. In the real world, this kind of thing hasn't been truly realized even after more than a decade. However, in the Marvel universe, this is already considered standard equipment for top scientists. Even within SHIELD's Academy, specifically established to train talent for Hydra, there is a dedicated course called Holographic Engineering, designed to help research-oriented agents better master the use of such equipment. Fortunately, thanks to the technical support from Harlow's Big Daddy, Luca was finally able to experience the equipment first. As expected, many inexperienced individuals were slightly shocked by Luca's sudden move. However, Luca did not stop what he was doing despite the astonishment of the people. He simply picked up his Dominator Beta 1.2 and began to introduce it. As many of you probably know, my father dedicated himself to creating a groundbreaking energy weapon. And this is the ion energy gun, forged based on his vision. I will name it the Orderer. Yes, considering that the primary target audience for this weapon is state police, Luca, after much deliberation, decided to abandon the original name, Dominator. Perhaps in the original work, such a name carries various metaphors for the dystopian world. But as a product, Luca obviously has to consider protecting his client's reputation and avoiding unnecessary impact. As Luca gave his brief explanation, the enormous blue projection changed continuously. At this point, many people had already realized what was going on. Isn't this the weapon that was circulating online a while ago? No wonder he looked familiar. It turns out that the guy in the video is the Orange Family boy. What video? The online video these people are referring to is, of course, the one where Luca blew up a dump truck with a single shot using the Dominator. However, the Battle of New York had only just ended, and the public's attention was more focused on the Avengers and aliens. In addition, Luca had the public help to suppress the news, so the actual spread was not very wide, and most of the videos that appeared online were blurred. However, with the physical object now available for comparison, it has been recalled by some people who have been following this news. However, Justin Hammer, who was in the corner, was not focused on Luca's subsequent introduction. Instead, he looked at Heinrich beside him with a hint of mockery in his eyes. Tilde the Order Keepers. That's quite in line with your ideals, isn't it? End of this chapter. Chapter 72, I guess you don and -039, T have bullets. Chapter 72, I guess you don't have bullets. Fifth update, of course. The weapons demonstration and explanations are just minor details. Ultimately, it all comes down to live fire testing. Just as Luca was introducing the Orderer's pistol, staff members at the edge of the testing area led out 2 pigs and a sheep. Seeing this, Luca smiled and sped up his explanation, concluding with a few words. Come on, let's see the actual shooting performance of this weapon. As he spoke, Luca called over the wrench, who had been waiting for a long time to demonstrate live fire shooting. However, at that moment, a clear, cold female voice came from the crowd. I recall Mr. Orange just mentioned that this Order Keeper pistol is equipped with the company's most advanced aiming assistance system and has achieved near-zero recoil. Then how about I, a frail woman who has hardly ever used firearms, test them for you? As soon as he said this, everyone's attention turned to Justin Hammer, who had spoken. However, she seemed oblivious to the attention she was receiving, and simply smiled sweetly at Luca in front of her. Perhaps this would better showcase the weapon's outstanding performance. What do you think, sir? This unexpected turn of events surprised not only everyone else present, but even Luca himself. Of course, he quickly came to his senses and gave Justin a strange smile in return. Miss Hammer wants to test it herself. Of course, that's fine. I think it would be an honor for the Order. As he spoke, Luca waved for Wrench to step back and stood there with a smile, watching Justin slowly walk towards him. To say that Justine Hammer, who is now at the helm of Hammer Industries and grew up in a military-industrial complex, is a weak woman who has hardly ever used firearms would be something Luca would absolutely not believe. However, since the other party is interested in having some fun, Luca is happy to oblige, whatever their intentions may be. Coincidentally, he also wanted to test what this young lady of a fallen tycoon was planning to do this time. He handed the Orderer he was using for testing to Justin. Before Luca could speak, the other woman picked up the tactical goggles beside her and gave Luca a charming smile, a departure from her previous demeanor. I was listening very carefully in class just now. As she spoke, she put the tactical glasses on her right eye and gently pressed the start button on top. The screen of the monocle immediately lit up. However, the message displayed on the screen was unauthorized use not granted. Justin Hammer's lips curled slightly at the sight. Nice design tilde, please grant me access. Handsome young man tilde. At this moment, Justin's voice was charming with a hint of mockery, as if he were a completely different person from his previous arrogant and aloof self. Seeing the stark contrast in the other person's demeanor, Luca simply shrugged slightly, turned around indifferently, and patted the orange harrow connected to the device next to him. Hello, grant testing access to our Miss Hammer. Give me permission, give me permission. The next moment, the unauthorized text in front of Justin disappeared rapidly, and various startup data flowed through him. However, at this moment, her attention was not on the characters that were scrolling by, but rather on the eye-catching orange hello logo on the table. However, although she was a little curious about Harrow, who was somewhat like a toy, she did not change her mind because of this, and instead followed her original plan. He immediately raised the Orderer pistol in his hand. Young master, be careful. Wrench, who had been feeling a bit curious because the beautiful Justine had taken the initiative to talk to Luca, said from the side. Upon seeing that the other party had actually raised his gun and aimed it at Luca, his expression immediately changed, and he was about to rush forward to subdue the other party. Similarly, those guests who were either there to watch the show or were curious about the upcoming test all had a sudden change in expression. Only Luca, the person directly involved, turned around and found that the other party had pointed a gun at him, but his expression did not change at all. Instead, he calmly stopped the wrench that was about to rush forward and calmly looked at Justin Hammer. It seems that Miss Hammer wasn't paying attention in class, as she claimed. I remember I just explained that the biggest feature of the Order Keeper pistol is that it can be connected to a terminal server to ensure that this weapon will not be used in dangerous events that endanger public safety. So, does Miss Hammer think I would grant test weapons the authority to attack others at this weapons demonstration? As expected at this moment, although Justin's orderer's pistol still had its usage rights revoked. But as the gun was pointed at Luca, what was displayed in the monocle was target not selected, trigger locked. However, Justin Hammer seemed completely unsurprised and didn't even pull the trigger once. He maintained his smile and spoke in a flippant tone. Of course I believe, Luca, your considerations are thorough. However, since it's a test, we should naturally showcase every aspect of this artwork. As she spoke, she deftly withdrew the orderer, even twirling it gracefully in her hand. She seemed to have completely forgotten who had just said that she was a weak woman who had little experience with firearms. However, she had just retrieved the orderer from her side. Suddenly, Luca produced a dark green pistol that looked very similar to the orderer. Before anyone else could react, the dark green pistol had already been drawn, its ostentatious blade emitting a chilling bluish-green light. Luca, who has entered fatal mode Dominator, is held aloft. At this moment, tilting his head, he looked away from the iron light of the gun muzzle and at Justin Hammer, who had put his gun away. He revealed the same mocking smile that Justin had shown earlier and asked in a flippant tone. So, Miss Hammer, would you like to guess whether this gun in my hand has any restrictions on its firing capabilities? Wrench, who had previously tried to subdue Justin Hammer, was standing nearby. Looking at the constantly flickering green light on the Dominator, a bead of cold sweat trickled down his forehead. Young master, you've already lit up your eyes. How are we supposed to guess? In contrast, Justin, who was being held at gunpoint, remained remarkably calm, as if he hadn't seen the unfolding posture and the green light, and replied with a smile. I guess not. Seeing this, Luca smiled and shrugged, and the Dominator in his hand returned to standby mode. Similarly, she tucked the gun back into her waistband in a neat flourish. Justin, you really know how to solve riddles. For some reason, the two exchanged a smile before Luca continued. Shall we continue with the weapons demonstration? End of this chapter. Chapter 73 should we merge? Chapter 73 should we merge? 6th update, Xi Tilda. After a very faint gunshot, the sheep in the distance collapsed in response. However, those watching this scene did not feel any surprise. After all, taser guns are gradually becoming more common among police officers in the United States. Although the stun gun has a range of only 5 meters, the electromagnetic anesthesia of the Order Guardians has a range of 50 meters. Although the power of stun guns is extremely inconsistent, only 7 or 8 out of 10 shots are effective, and one of them may even kill the victim directly. It has been widely criticized by police officers across the United States. The orderly one's effects are stable and can even penetrate sheep's wool to take effect, providing excellent anesthesia without any side effects. Although the stun gun is only capable of firing one reserved bullet before becoming unusable, the Order's non-lethal mode can fire hundreds of bullets in succession. However, ultimately, whether it's a stun gun or a tranquilizer gun, the audience is limited, and the special effects aren't particularly impressive. Those more professional company veterans might be able to see the amazing commercial potential of this excellent tranquilizer gun. But in the eyes of ordinary shareholders, is this all? Fortunately, the non-lethal mode is only for those in the know. Immediately afterwards, 3 pure metal targets were pushed to the center of the test field, along with a brand new black sedan. Justin Hammer, who was casually fiddling with the orderer's pistol in his hand, narrowed his eyes slightly upon seeing this and turned to look at Luca, who was standing calmly to the side. Audi Q5 Security, a VR4 level armored vehicle. Luca raised an eyebrow slightly upon hearing this. Ms. Justin has good taste. With limited funds, she can only use such inexpensive items for testing. Upon seeing this, Justin smiled and uttered a soft sound. Activate lethal mode. The next moment, the light gun in his hand unfolded. Amidst the astonished gazes of others, she didn't even glance at the 3 metal targets. He fired 3 shots in quick succession. The 3 rapidly fired blue-green ion beams all hit the bulletproof vehicle in the distance. The energy beam collided with the vehicle body, and the high-energy beam, with its sizzling sound, completely pierced through the vehicle. The front of the car, the doors, and the windows all have two transparent, bright red holes. Is this really bulletproof? Hearing the slightly surprised whispers of those around him, Luca smiled and explained. That's right, traditional bulletproof equipment will be completely useless against the Orderers. In fact, the 3 targets next to it are 5, 10, and 15 pure steel metal plates, respectively. But it seems there's no need to test them anymore. Just as Luca was speaking, a huge cyan green orb of light shot out from the side. It turned out that Justin had somehow activated melting mode. As the giant ball of light struck the bulletproof vehicle, the entire vehicle instantly began to melt. Unlike the original Dominator-S decomposition mode, the stripped-down version of the Orderer can only destroy targets by compressing and condensing high-temperature energy ion spheres. Even so, watching the enormous energy sphere slowly melt the entire bulletproof car into a pool of molten iron in the distance, even leaving a crater of blazing lava on the ground, was a terrifying sight. The shock to onlookers seemed even greater than the instantaneous disintegration of the Dominator. At this moment, everyone watching had only one thought in their minds. Is this weapon really for the police? Luca, ignoring Justin Hammer, who was sticking out of the magazine with a slightly smoking battery, turned to his stunned own men and asked. The power of the Orderers is such that it is already a very mature product, and the production line can be improved for mass production at any time. Moreover, the future of Orange Industries is far more than this. Then, without waiting for anyone else to react, Luca clapped his hands again. Advanced turret, disguised as an energy weapon. Because the polymer adhesive formula has not yet been finalized, Luca replaced him with the explosive missile pencil missile, and he is now using a handheld missile launcher. The suit combat suit was just synthesized 2 days ago, and its effects were demonstrated by the company's research team leader, a staff member who is completely powerless. Picture. Luca showcased each of the products that looked somewhat sci-fi to others. Faced with shareholders and senior executives from various departments who were completely dumbfounded and didn't know how to start a conversation, Luca remained calm and even offered some words of comfort to the people present. Don't be surprised, these are just laboratory products for now. They will not be mass-produced until the technology is mature and the cost is under control. Moreover, the company's current funds are insufficient to support me in pushing them all onto the stage, so the company's sales focus will still remain on the Order pistol. So I'll have to trouble you all with the sales channels from now on. Of course, in reality, the things Luca showed were basically synthesized original props, let alone mass-produced. Some of them, even the most seasoned experts, haven't figured out what's going on yet. However, these things are more than enough to fool the shareholders and help Luca establish his authority within the company. In fact, given how things have developed, the shareholders no longer care what Luca is saying. At this moment, they looked at Luca as if he were an inexhaustible mountain of gold. Some shareholders, who had close ties with the company, even whispered to their friends next to them. Didn't you say you wanted to sell your shares? I'll offer double or triple. However, all he got in return was the look of disbelief from his decades-old friend. Upon seeing this, Luca's smile became even more genuine. But just then, Justin Hammer, who had already returned the Orderer's pistol to Wrench, slowly approached Luca and spoke in a seductive tone. Have you considered merging Orange Industries and Hammer Industries? Luca, who had been enjoying watching the expressions of the others, paused slightly upon hearing this and looked at Justin Hammer, who was intentionally or unintentionally getting close to him, with a strange expression. Seeing that Luca did not speak, Justin continued. Orange Industries' platform is too small. Although Hammer Industries is not as good as it used to be, it still retains a lot of its old connections. By merging Orange Industries into the Hammer Group, I can retain the name Orange Industries, and you can still control it personally. In the future Hammer Corporation, I can also give you half of my shares. It's all garbage plot, so I might as well release it all at once. To avoid feeling uncomfortable for days, if you don't like watching this part. If you enjoy watching this, consider it a treat for everyone. There are only 6 chapters in total, and I've deleted 2 chapters containing new plot content in preparation for revisions. This whole rambling, garbage plot is released in one go, and then it's over. There were no more drafts saved. And so I continued writing. End of this chapter. Chapter 74, Pretending to be a Genius. Chapter 74, Pretending to be a Genius after watching the others leave. Luca leaned against a pile of equipment, thinking about his earlier conversation with Justin Hammer. According to the other party, since Hammer Industries began to decline, she has taken back most of the shares. Justin's willingness to use half of the proceeds to buy the former Orange Industries is indeed a testament to his sincerity. It's estimated that Hammer Industries has been hoping to have its own Tony Stark ever since Justin Timberlake. To put it bluntly, no matter how nice Justin Hammer's words are, an acquisition is an acquisition. Luca has absolute confidence in his future. He doesn't expect to become a true scientific genius like Tony Stark, but he feels that it won't be long before he can at least pretend to be someone similar to him. Rather than getting involved in the mess that is Hammer Industries, it would be better to focus on developing our own industries. As for Heinrich, the investor, Luca had originally thought that he would have a few words with him before leaving. They talked about things like adding more funds or expanding business. This also provides an opportunity for me to investigate the other party's somewhat strange left eye. Unfortunately, Heinrich seemed to have no such intention at all. He simply gave a meaningful look before leaving and readily took his leave. Forget it, thinking about it too much is useless. The important thing is to focus on collecting items and improving my strength. With that in mind, Luca stopped thinking about it and ignored his subordinates who were packing up. He went to Orange Harrow's side on his own. He patted its round, plump body and whispered, "Hey, slow down when you prompt me next time. I almost messed up the script just now." That's right. The reason Luca was able to talk nonstop at today's exhibition without revealing that he was an imposter was because he had already discussed it with Harrow. The other party connected to tracking glasses to act as a teleprompter, displaying the conversation content to you in real time. After all, although Luca had prepared beforehand, his theoretical foundation was still lacking. If he got stuck when asked a question, he would probably make quite a fool of himself. However, perhaps Harlow overestimated Luca. The prompt in the glasses was skipped at an absurdly fast speed. Luca could easily make a mistake if he's not careful. However, at this moment, in response to Luca's somewhat complaining tone, Harrow popped himself out of the slot, didn't even glance at Luca, and skipped away into the distance. He didn't forget to keep making sarcastic remarks. Stupid Luca, stupid Luca. Feeling somewhat embarrassed, Luca looked around and found that everyone, including Wrench, had wisely turned their heads away and were working diligently. Only then did he jog after Harrow. But before Luca could even grab the agile little guy, Samira leaned closer and whispered something to Luca. "Young Master, Osborne Biotech still hasn't given us a clear answer." Luca, who had been in a good mood, frowned slightly upon hearing this. That shouldn't be the case. Since Norman Osborne was willing to conduct human trials for his wife's illness, surely he wouldn't just ignore the potentially effective drug I've offered. What did they say? Osborne Biotech's response is that Mr. Norman is currently engaged in a very important experiment and is temporarily unable to meet with you, Samira said. An important experiment? I'd be happy if I could find out. Luca wanted to suggest that Samira send someone to find out what kind of business Osborne Bio was involved in. Just thinking about it, either the other party is just making excuses and there's no important experiment at all, or it really is true, in which case even with Samira's connections, she might not be able to find out anything, and she might even needlessly offend the other party. Luca then changed his mind and said, "Let's contact other biopharmaceutical labs first, and keep an eye on Osborne's lab for now." Samira, yes, young master. However, after speaking, Samira hesitated slightly before continuing. Young master, the CFO just came to me to remind you that the company's funds, even if it maintains the status quo, may only last for less than 6 months. If we want to develop new production lines, the funding gap could be significant. Luca, who was thinking about which other well-known biological scientists in the Marvel series, looked up at Samira with a strange expression upon hearing this. Why would she ask you to relay her message? Samira looked slightly embarrassed upon hearing this. Young master, there were too many people surrounding you just now. She only asked me to remind you. I guess she will report to you separately later. Seeing Samira's somewhat embarrassed appearance, Luca found it amusing. It seems that at some point, Samira, who was both a bodyguard and driver, started to resemble a secretary and butler more and more. Of course, this is not referring to her outward appearance. After all, while Samira is not exactly ugly, she is considered large and robust by women's standards. However, it is precisely because of this contrast that Samira herself feels a bit awkward now, since she didn't really have much experience with these kinds of jobs before. Luca, of course, wouldn't stand by and watch his elder, who was so devoted to him, be in such a sorry state, so he immediately spoke up. Aunt Samira, could you help me hire a secretary later? It's fine if she's from within the company or if she's hired from outside. You can decide, and just let me review the final candidate. Upon hearing this, Samira breathed a sigh of relief, feeling much more relaxed. However, Luca added something else. As for the finance department, tell them to wait. Once the tentative orders are received, I will apply for a special loan from the bank. Samira quickly wrote down these details before continuing to ask questions. So, young master, shall we go home now, or return to the company with this equipment? Previously, Luca had handed over the completed order prototype and some data to the company's research department. We plan to have them develop some supporting equipment based on this, or create some derivative models or something. So Samira wondered if Luca should go back to the company headquarters first. However, Luca shook his head slightly after hearing this. Let the guys in the research department work on those things themselves. It's not possible to mass-produce them for the time being, so there's no rush to develop them. As for us, let's go shopping. After saying that, Luca scooped up Harrow, who had come close again, and strode out of the testing area. At the same time, I also thought to myself with a rather amusing feeling, even for a genius like Iron Man, these props are far too few. A diverse range of methods is the key. End of this chapter, Chapter 75, Busy Tony. Chapter 75, Busy Tony. What Luca didn't know was, while he was thinking about creating a knockoff Tony Stark, Tony, who had been busy for several days, also happened to think of this insignificant kid. Logically speaking, Tony, who has been busy setting up the Disaster Relief Committee and establishing a charitable foundation and actively participating in the reconstruction of New York, should have taken a good rest and recovered after finally having some free time. However, for Tony, who had been in a state of anxiety ever since the Battle of New York, even though his body was exhausted, his brain still refused to let him sleep peacefully. Left with no other option, a frustrated and anxious Tony could only throw on a coat and head to his lab alone, hoping to alleviate his anxiety about the future by developing a brand new Mark armor. However, he had only just turned on the holographic operating device and was thinking about optimizing the design drawings. In the lab, however, came the mechanical voice of his smart butler, Jarvis. Sir, you asked me to remind you that the new armor needs to have an external obstacle removal function added to its self-cleaning system. External obstacle removal function. Tony, who was in extremely poor condition at the moment, was slightly taken aback upon hearing this. However, immediately, in his somewhat muddled mind, the images of the Zeta Swiss soldiers who had fallen down the building covered in glue, and the embarrassing scene of himself lying on the ground being pointed at by that boy with a pencil case, flashed through his mind. Yes, that's right. I was planning to design this obstacle clearing system. I think adding miniature laser, cutting emitters to the joints would be a good idea. Tilda, what do you think, Jarvis? Although he uttered a question, Tony Stark clicked on the virtual screen a few times and prepared to build the architecture according to his plan. However, Jarvis didn't care whether his master was genuinely asking the question or not, and gave an answer based on his own logic. Sir, I think this may not be a perfect solution. Adding miniature laser cutters to multiple joints would cause a sharp increase in your armor's energy consumption. However, upon hearing this, Tony did not stop what he was doing. Instead, he laughed and teased Jarvis. Jarvis, do I need to remind you? The Mark armor is powered by the arc reactor, so this energy consumption is negligible. To everyone's surprise, Jarvis immediately retorted, Sir, I need to remind you that the Mark armor's energy reserves are powered only by the electricity converted from the arc reactor, and the energy conversion and storage itself takes a certain amount of time. In fact, according to the combat records in my database, you have been in crisis 6 times in the past 10 battles due to insufficient energy. Tony Stark finally stopped what he was doing, unsure of what to say, and awkwardly scribbled at the design in front of him. After a short while, perhaps due to the mental stiffness caused by anxiety, he finally recovered somewhat. He simply raised both hands, clenched them into a ball, and threw the entire laser obstacle removal system solution in front of him into the recycling bin. Only then did he stand up again. Okay, but I think improving energy supply efficiency would be a better solution. Tony, who was unwilling to admit his mistake, decided to make things a little more difficult for himself and use a more complicated method to make his laser obstacle clearing look less stupid. However, he paused briefly before taking action again. Whether to change the subject or simply on a whim, she asked Jarvis again. By the way, Jarvis, that glue boy, I remember I asked Pepper to send him a prosthetic arm. It should be in his hands by now, right? In fact, more than 10 days had passed since then, but Tony Stark, who was busy day and night, had no idea when he had asked Pepper Potts for help. Yes, sir. Miss Pepper has delivered the prosthetic limb you made to Mr. Luca Orange and left him your business card. Jarvis's mechanical voice continued. Sir, would you like me to retrieve the recent reports on Mr. Orange? Tony was slightly taken aback by this. He knew that Jarvis usually wouldn't speak without reason, so there must be a reason why he brought up Luca's current situation. However, before Tony could even ask any questions, suddenly a doorbell rang outside. Jarvis also aptly changed the subject and offered a reminder. Sir, Dr. Banner and Mr. Saul are outside the door. Upon hearing this, Tony helplessly turned off all the virtual screens in front of him and quickly went upstairs to meet the two. However, as soon as they met, Thor, dressed in casual clothes, spoke loudly with a serious expression. Stark, we need your help. Seeing this, Dr. Banner helplessly shrugged at Tony Stark. Here's the thing. After Bruce Banner explained it to Tony, he finally understood. During this time, Dr. Banner had been cooperating with SHIELD in an attempt to capture Loki, who had escaped with the Tesseract on the day of the Battle of New York. As for Thor, without the Tesseract to repair the Bifrost in Asgard, traveling to and from Earth became extremely difficult. So he simply didn't return to Asgard and stayed on Earth to help SHIELD capture Loki, who had escaped with the Tesseract. As for Tony Stark, Nick Fury simply didn't inform him of this operation because he was busy cooperating with the official disaster reconstruction work. However, SHIELD subsequently detected the gamma ray signal generated when the Tesseract was activated twice, but ultimately failed to find Loki's whereabouts. Left with no other option, they can only ask Dr. Banner to step in and seek Tony Stark's help again. However, Tony rubbed his temples, looking a bit troubled, but then seemed to realize something. He immediately leaned back, half sitting on the armrest of the sofa, looking at the two of them with a mocking gaze, and said without any mercy, So why are only the two of you looking for me? Where are the others? Why didn't Nick Fury call me? Oh, I see. The idea that you could handle everything without Tony was probably that one-eyed bastard's idea, right? Tony, actually. Dr. Banner wanted to say something more, but Tony interrupted him by raising his hand. As it turns out, if you had told me about this sooner, we might have been able to catch Bambi on the first 2 missions. Seeing Tony still spouting his sharp tongue, Thor also spoke up. Stark, we need your help now. Loki has the Tesseract, and if we don't find him soon, he could very well summon a whole new army elsewhere. However, Tony Stark completely ignored him, instead rolling his eyes at Thor, leaning back slightly, and striking a pose as if he were playing cat's cradle. I remember you Norsemen know magic, don't you? And what's that? Clairvoyance. Why don't you ask him to help you? Loki has been skilled in illusion magic since he was a child, and Heimdall didn't give me any hints this time either. Thor had a sour face, but after gritting his teeth, he still chose to answer Tony's question. Seeing that Thor wasn't arguing with Tony Stark, Dr. Banner, who was standing nearby, decisively interrupted again. Tony, we need your help. Having gained the upper hand verbally, Tony wasn't going to make things difficult for the two of them any further. He planned to use the remaining 90% of his power on Nick Fury, that dark-skinned guy, later. All right, then let Tony help you find the runaway princess. Tony Stark, who was about to leave with the two, had clearly already put Luca, the outsider, out of his mind. End of this chapter. Chapter 76 Luck, Chance Encounter. Chapter 76 Luck, Chance Encounter. Unbeknownst to Tony Stark and his team, who were busy with their work, Loki was using the Tesseract more and more frequently because of Shild's increasing pressure. He was even considering a tentative collaboration with some of the natives on Earth whom he had once looked down upon. Luca, on the other side, was even less likely to know this. At this moment, he was happily strolling around the mall. The reason he was so happy was that, after searching for many days, he finally found a brand new item today. And it just so happens to be the Detective Conan world prop that he has been looking forward to. Bowtie voice changer. Detective Conan World 3.5. Manufacturer, Professor Agasa. Core component, red bow. Consumables, 1 miniature battery, 1 small microphone, 1 small sound player. Item description, an ordinary-looking voice-changing bow tie. By rotating the hidden knob inside, it can mimic various different voices. Anyone, regardless of age or gender, who speaks in front of you while wearing the bow tie can have their words recorded and perfectly imitated. Friendly reminder. Using this item can effectively reduce your presence and obscure the direction of your voice, making it difficult for others to notice you even if they are very close. That's right, it's the very item that's probably the most frequently used by the Grim Reaper in the Conan world. Although Luca bought several ill-fitting children's clothes from the children's clothing store in order to get the bow tie, which attracted strange looks from many passers-by. However, he no longer cared much about such trivial matters. Moreover, this acquisition of the item also made Luca notice another characteristic of the cheat code. The core component of this bow voice changer, the red bow, according to the shop assistant, seems to be for easy adjustment of tightness. The bow tie itself has 2 drive knobs on the back, one on the left and one on the right. It seems that the more similar the item is to the original, the higher the probability of it becoming a core component. No, that's obvious. It should be said that the more similar the item is, the fewer crafting materials are needed. Yes, perhaps because the bow tie itself has a knob. The item description clearly mentions that the knob needs to be rotated, but the crafting materials do not mention the need for similar materials. If that's the case, if I want a certain item, and I can create something that's about 70–80% similar, could that directly become a core component, allowing me to add some high-tech features to the item through synthesis? The more Luca thought about it, the more likely it seemed, so he immediately wanted to go back and test it. If one attempt failed, he could always find a simpler tool and try mass production. If Luca could really manufacture the core components on his own, he felt he might be ready to take off immediately. Fortunately, Luca managed to remain calm. Mass production, manufacturing props, and even selecting suitable materials for manufacturing are not things that can be accomplished in a short period of time. It's still early. After a moment's hesitation, Luca decided to take advantage of his good luck today and browse through other shops. And as expected, what happened next seemed to prove that Luca's choice was not wrong. Not long had passed. In a rather simply decorated watch shop, Luca spotted that familiar white light again. However, this time, the light seemed to be held by a father and daughter who were examining it and preparing to pay. At this moment, Luca didn't care about Samira and Longbow following behind him and quickly walked to the counter. However, upon getting closer, Luca realized that he actually knew the father and daughter who were shopping for watches. Chief George, what a coincidence to meet him here. Indeed, the father and daughter standing in front of the watch shop counter, hesitating whether to pay, are none other than New York Police Commissioner George Stacy and his daughter, the famous Gwen Stacy. Although Luca had never met Gwen in this world, he recognized her at a glance. At this moment, Gwen seemed to be about the same age as Luca, with bright blonde short hair, and her whole being exuded a youthful and vibrant girlish charm. However, Chief George, who was standing next to her, seemed to be in a completely different state from his daughter. Although it was clear that Chief George had taken good care of his appearance and kept a smile on his face because he was shopping with his daughter. However, his somewhat sunken eye sockets and slightly messy stubble still revealed his undeniable fatigue and haggardness. It seems that New York has been giving this bureau chief quite a headache lately. As Luca was thinking this, Chief George, who had just heard him greet him, was still somewhat dazed and didn't react. Instead, Gwen Stacy, who was standing next to him, was the first to turn around and look in their direction. However, as soon as she saw Luca, she immediately put on a strange expression, and her eyes looked inexplicably odd. Seeing this, Luca was slightly puzzled and spoke first. "This young lady must be Chief George's daughter, right? Have we met before?" Gwen, who was already a little nervous, immediately began to shake her head frantically when she heard Luca's question. At the same time, she quickly took a step back and hid half of her body behind her father. From the other person's strange gaze, Luca actually detected a hint of fear and delight. Did I misread it? Perhaps George, Stacy, and Gwen talked about my past. Just as Luca was thinking this, George Stacy, who had come to her senses, took over the conversation, mustered her spirits, and politely returned Luca's greeting. "So it's Mr. Orange. What a coincidence. What brings you here?" As she spoke, George Stacy subconsciously glanced at her daughter, beside her out of the corner of her eye. He didn't actually want his daughter to have too much contact with people like Luca. Leaving aside the fact that this young master of the Orange family once shot and blew up a dump truck. In fact, George Stacy was aware of the attack on the Orange family mansion a few days ago, and that Mr. Orange, along with his bodyguard, had killed his own uncle who had been kidnapped. However, the Orange family, their lawyers, and even the Connecticut police all gave the same account of the matter. The entire process of the case was reasonable and legal. As the New York police chief, who was only one of the locations where the crime occurred, he naturally wouldn't cause trouble for no reason and offend everyone. At this moment, he simply didn't want his daughter to have anything to do with such troublesome people. But about that incident before, I should have never told Gwen. End of this chapter. Chapter 77, A Chance Encounter, The Watch. Chapter 77, A Chance Encounter, The Watchy shouldn't have told Gwen about that. With these thoughts in mind, Chief George's tone naturally became somewhat distant. However, Luca didn't pay much attention to this, and his gaze instead fell back on the watch Gwen was holding. A mechanical watch, black strap, and a flip-up dial. It's definitely an anesthesia watch. Luca was very confident in his premonition, and immediately put on a somewhat apologetic expression and spoke. "I am indeed out shopping. In fact, I've been looking for a suitable watch lately. Would you mind if I took a look at the one Miss Stacy is holding?" Upon hearing this, everyone present was stunned. Director George looked at Luca's wrist with astonishment. It was clearly a valuable, handcrafted lange piece. Following George Stacy's gaze, Luca himself felt slightly embarrassed, but on the surface he remained calm. "Watch collecting is just a small hobby of mine. I wonder if I could part with it." However, at this moment, a shop assistant who noticed the awkward atmosphere spoke up very sensibly. "Sir, we happen to have one of these watches in stock. If you'd like, please let us know." As she spoke, the sales clerk, who possessed excellent emotional intelligence, immediately took out an identical mechanical watch from under the counter. However, it was clear that the watch did not emit a white light. Now the atmosphere is even more awkward. Just as Luca was hesitating about what reason to use to continue demanding the genuine piece from Gwen Stacy. Instead, after a slight hesitation, the other person took the initiative to hand the watch in their hand to Luca. "If you like this, Luca." "Yes, I like it." Before the other person could finish speaking, Luca took the watch that was handed to him. Well, although it was a little embarrassing compared to gaining an item, he could completely accept this minor embarrassment. However, after thinking about it, Luca added a sentence. "Thank you." At this moment, Samira and Longbow, who had followed Luca into the store, both wore strange expressions. With my eyes, I witnessed this seventh covenant. The fireworks of the divine age will illuminate the first encounter. The monarch star trails and the summer spirits converge here across 7 parallel universes. Okay, let's not talk about the elaborate fantasies that Chang Gong has in his mind, complete with all sorts of special effects. Seeing that things seemed to be going in a direction she didn't want to, George Stacy immediately interrupted her daughter, who was about to say something. Since Mr. Orange has already acquired the collection he desired, I will not disturb him any longer. After saying that, without waiting for Luca to speak, he immediately grabbed Gwen and prepared to leave. However, before George Stacy could even take the first step, having already achieved his goal, Luca did not immediately look at the pop-up cheat panel, but instead spoke again. "Hold on." The father and daughter, who were already preparing to leave, turned back in confusion. However, Luca still took 2 steps forward, got close to Chief George, and then whispered, "I don't know, could I take a few minutes of your time, Director George? It's a small matter, and I think it might be possible to discuss it with you first." "Yes, it's about work." George Stacy, who had originally intended to find an excuse to leave, finally gave up on that idea. As a conscientious police officer, he couldn't bring himself to ignore a New York citizen discussing any case-related issues with him. However, contrary to George Stacy's expectations, Luca was not looking for him because of the previous 2 cases. "But so, the police weapon you're talking about is the energy gun you used in that car accident attack." In a corner of the watch shop, after listening to Luca's brief explanation, Director George's expression was indescribably complex. He himself had no idea how today's simple shopping trip with his daughter had turned into equipment procurement for the New York Police Department. However, Luca, standing in front of him, did not feel embarrassed at all because of Chief George's strange gaze. Instead, he continued to add, "That's right. Although the company's sales department will take the initiative to communicate with the New York Police Department about this matter, since we've run into you today, I think it wouldn't hurt to give you a heads up beforehand. As the current director of the New York City Police Department, it's true that such a large order cannot be decided in a single word. But after all, he was a hard worker who had worked his way up from the frontline sheriff position. So George Stacy still had a considerable say in the subsequent procurement process. Director George is probably more aware than I am of the unrest in New York, caused by the leak of alien weapons during this period. Moreover, the Order Keeper weapon itself not only enables those brave New York police officers to better fight danger. The weapon's excellent classification system, its non-lethal nature with no side effects, and its brand new built-in intelligence system will also make frontline officers more acceptable to the public in future law enforcement operations. Upon hearing this, George Stacy finally became serious. In fact, from the perspective of improving the power of equipment alone, the police may not be in a great hurry. After all, although the existing police equipment may not look like the cool high-tech stuff, there are still quite a few high-powered weapons. However, the incident in which a white police officer shot and wounded a black man during a previous arrest was what truly gave him a headache. The impact of that incident has not completely subsided even today. Just yesterday, a group of black people who had escaped from Hell's Kitchen even took to the streets to protest, forcing the police department to reduce its manpower. After a moment of silence, Chief George finally spoke again, his tone more serious than before. "This matter is of great importance, and I cannot agree hastily based on just a few words from you." Although that's what he said, Luca's smile only deepened. He shrugged as if it didn't matter, and said in a relaxed tone, "That's natural. Today is just a coincidence. Orange Industries staff will deliver a detailed weapons report and bidding proposal to your office later. I would also love to welcome Chief George and his police team to Orange Industrial to visit the weapons testing site." For some reason, George Stacy felt a slight sense of relief after hearing this. It would be too much to ask this old-fashioned policeman to take the initiative to discuss business. Looking at Luca's outstretched right robotic arm, Director George shook hands with him somewhat awkwardly before taking his leave with his daughter. Watch the two of them leave. Luca first called out to the shop assistant in the distance and then paid for both watches. He looked at the core component in his hand with some helplessness and sighed in disappointment. What is this thing now? End of this chapter. Chapter 78 Go, hello. Chapter 78 Go, hello. Transforming watch. Megamind 1.5. Manufacturer, Magme. Core component, handcrafted mechanical watch. Composite consumables. 1 miniature battery, 1 miniature scanner, 1 miniature projector, 1 miniature smart chip. Item description. A magical transformation watch. It can scan the physical features of others or actively upload facial data to create a holographic projection disguise. It can store multiple scan projections, and although it relies on projection for disguise, it also possesses complete audio camouflage capabilities and realistic physical collision detection, ensuring it won't reveal any flaws due to differences in body size. Friendly reminder. Although this watch already has pretty good functions, there will be a surprise after it's been combined. That's right. Regardless of how confident Luca was in his intuition beforehand. However, the final result was that the core component he obtained was not the Anesthesia Watch he had envisioned in the Conan world. While this transformation watch seems a tiny bit more powerful than the Tranquilizer Watch, what I really want is the unlockable set effects. Luca looked at the mechanical watch in his hand with a hint of helplessness, unsure whether he should be happy or not. So today's event isn't actually a detective special, but a spy special, is that right? What kind of transforming watch is this? Its functions seem to completely overshadow the voice-changing bow I just got. Judging from the prop description alone, this watch seems to be the pinnacle of spy disguise props. Even before the voice-changing bow tie could be synthesized, a superior alternative had already emerged. Fortunately, Luca's desire to collect the Detective Conan world items wasn't based on their usefulness, so he simply stopped worrying about it. However, this friendly reminder seems a little special. A surprise awaits after combining them. Surely this item doesn't have some hidden function that can only be discovered after combining it. Although he had some doubts, since the crafting materials required for this item were relatively common, Luca simply put it away and planned to craft it when he got home tonight. After another leisurely stroll, Luca seemed to have run out of luck for the day, as he did not encounter any more core components. Seeing that it was getting late, Luca randomly picked a sporting goods store, ordered a large number of various models of blank skateboards, and then prepared to head home. Night had slowly fallen, and the number of pedestrians on the streets had thinned out considerably. Those homeless people who had been huddled in some dark corner during the day gradually came out onto the streets, seemingly looking for some supplies to get them through the night. Luca, who was waiting with Longbow for Samira to drive over, glanced at the guy next to him who was still putting on a cool and aloof act, and his lips twitched involuntarily. But at this moment, a figure wearing a worn-out white hoodie and a hood. It was rushing towards Luca from a distance at a speed that was slightly beyond that of a normal human. Longbow, who was always on guard, immediately reached for the pistol at his waist. Even Luca himself clenched his fists secretly, becoming somewhat wary. However, at that moment, a somewhat mournful cry came from behind that figure. "Robbery, that man is robbing us. Grab him." The person shouting was dressed in rags and was probably just an ordinary homeless man. Naturally, he couldn't possibly be as fast as the hoodie-clad figure ahead, who was faster than Bolt. At this point, he could only collapse to the ground, panting heavily, crying out helplessly. The current scene seems to be just an ordinary scenario. A homeless man robbing another homeless man of his loot. The few passers-by on the nearby street glanced at it, but then ignored it. Luca himself was too lazy to meddle in such matters. He immediately took 2 steps back warily, letting the hooded man dart past him in a flash. However, just as the hooded figure swept past Luca, however, noticed a faint white light flashing on the wrist of the person who was running. Well, it's not exactly that Luca has a sharp eye. After all, when that person rushed past Luca at high speed, the white light almost left a trail of light in the air. Could it be another core component of the watch? He thinks he can get away with this. No, wait, I'm doing the right thing, punishing evil. With this in mind, Luca decisively reached for his waist and drew his Dominator pistol. Fortunately, Luca was still quite sensible and didn't activate any lethal modes. Instead, he used a normal, non-lethal mode to pull the trigger directly at the rapidly running figure. 2 zzz sounds. 2 electromagnetic tranquilizer darts, each carrying a bluish-green light, were fired at the man at high speed. However, Luca's 2 consecutive shots, which were already aimed with assisted aiming, were easily dodged by the opponent. The fleeing robber seemed to have eyes in the back of his head. Although he was running away from Luca, he only slightly changed his position, and both tranquilizer darts missed their mark. Undeterred, Luca pulled the trigger again and again. However, after a few more electromagnetic tranquilizer grenades were fired, the opponent seemed to dodge them more easily. Even though Luca had consciously spread out his fire to try and block the man's movement. However, it still managed to evade all the bullets with its agile maneuvers. Throughout the entire process, the person didn't even turn their head once, as if they possessed some kind of precognitive ability. Superpowers. At this moment, Longbow, standing to the side, was still confused as to why Luca suddenly wanted to help the homeless man capture the robbers. However, he still pulled out the pistol from his pocket. However, before he could even raise his gun, Luca reached out and stopped him. Real guns are too troublesome. That's what he said, but Luca didn't actually hand over the Dominator to Longbow. Watching the person run further and further away, Luca squatted down and turned the knob on the side of his shoe. It's a bit far, let's go second gear. That's what I was thinking. Immediately afterwards, a stream of 7-colored light flowed around Luca's right foot, and tiny blue arcs of electricity crackled. His gaze was fixed on the person who had run to the end of the street and was about to turn into the alley. Luca deftly and gently hooked his right foot. He simply hooked Harrow, who was rolling around board to the side, and pulled him to a position about a meter off the ground in front of him. Next moment, before Harlow could even react to what had happened, Luca, who had already raised his right foot high, unleashed a powerful volley. Go. Hello. End of this chapter. Chapter 79, Visitors from Parallel Worlds. Chapter 79, Visitors from Parallel Worlds. Now, some of the confused Harrow were suddenly kicked by Luca in the round body. Harrow, who already possessed the peculiar characteristic of being both hard and soft, immediately underwent a huge deformation in midair. Followed by, bam! The white shockwave exploded outwards from Luca's right foot. The round, orange hello flew towards the person in the distance like a cannonball. An orange streak of light flashed by, and the air seemed to be torn apart. The deafening roar couldn't even keep up with the speed of the Harrow's charge. However, the escapee's precognitive abilities seemed to activate again. Just as Harrow flew out, the opponent bent down and changed direction again, making an evasive maneuver. However, it's unclear whether it's due to the shape of the orange Harrow itself that the ball's trajectory is so unpredictable. Or perhaps the power of concepts within the cheat system is working again. The orange Harrow made bizarre, continuous changes of direction in midair, yet still managed to lock onto the fleeing person's head. Next moment, bang tilde. The man's precognitive abilities ultimately failed to save him from this sudden death. The Harrow shell struck him squarely on the back of the head without holding back. The immense impact knocked the man to the ground, where he rolled several times before finally lying motionless on the floor without uttering a sound. The orange harrow itself, after being rapidly deformed upon impact, was bounced back. Luca ran 2 quick steps, about to reach out and catch Harrow as he fell from the sky. Unexpectedly, when the little guy saw Luca coming, he immediately spread out his big ears in midair and flapped them frantically, forcibly changing his falling direction, bypassing Luca's outstretched hands, and heading into Luca's forehead. Stupid Luca, stupid Luca. The orange hello bumped into Luca, sending him stumbling, and seemed still not satisfied after landing. He continued to bounce around, attacking Luca's knee. His beady eyes blinked frantically as he kept cursing. Stupid Luca, stupid Luca. Luca, seeing this, was not angry. He smiled and picked up the little gadget, then slightly increased the force of his right mechanical arm to prevent it from escaping. He even laughed as he tried to excuse himself. All right, Tilda, I just didn't have any suitable balls around Tilda, and you're just the right round one, Tilda. Besides, your mech's outer shell is so tough it won't even break if it explodes. What are you afraid of if it gets kicked a couple of times? His explanation only made the little thing angrier. However, although Orange Harrow had invincible defense, its offensive capabilities were really worrying. Seeing that it could not break free from Luca's brute force grip, it could only continue to curse and grumble incessantly. Unfortunately, the little thing's insults were just as weak as its attacks, so Luca simply chose to ignore them. At this moment, Longbow also ran quickly to Luca's side. He glanced at Luca's right foot with lingering fear, only one thought remaining in his mind. Shatter the darkness with thunder. Though that's the thought, out of a sense of duty as a subordinate, Chang Gong still cautiously asked in a low voice, "Young master, is that man dead?" Logically speaking, such hesitant words should not have come from Chang Gong's mouth. However, after thinking about the power of that kick just now, and Luca's earlier action of stopping him from firing the gun, he realized that. Chang Gong wondered if his lord's refusal to let him use a gun meant he intended to execute the other party himself. However, Luca didn't seem to care much about Longbow's question. Instead, he answered in a relaxed tone. "Don't worry, you won't die." Well, it's a humanoid creature after all. It can't be worse than a Chitauri humanoid, can it? Thinking about all this, Luca, carrying the still restless Harrow in one arm, quickly walked a few steps to the robber, who was sleeping soundly. He bent down and flipped the guy, who was lying on the ground in an odd position, over. As it turned out, this turn of events had a significant impact. When they saw the face of the person lying on the ground, both Luca and Longbow's expressions changed. How could it be her? Gwen. Indeed, the robber had already closed his eyes and passed out, and even had some dirt on his face. But both Luca and Longbow recognized each other at a glance. It was Gwen Stacy, whom the two had just met that afternoon, who was out shopping with her father, Chief George. Wrong. After lifting his hand and completely removing the other person's hood, the perceptive Luca immediately noticed the difference between the person in front of him and Gwen he had met that afternoon. Even if Gwen in this world truly possesses abilities beyond those of ordinary people. They even resorted to changing clothes late at night to rob homeless people. But only a few hours have passed, and it's impossible for the other party to simply change their hairstyle just for the sake of robbing. Yes, the unconscious Gwen standing in front of Luca looked exactly the same as the one he had seen that afternoon. However, it wasn't just a regular shoulder-length bob. It had a slightly punk look, with the right side of her hair completely shaved off, and even the remaining wavy bangs on her left side were much longer than Gwen's from that afternoon. There might be some thoughts about whether they are twins, like with Chang Gong. However, the first thought that flashed through Luca's mind was, is this some kind of Gwen from a parallel universe? While Luca and Longbow were in shock, the homeless man who had been shouting robbery earlier cautiously ran over, looking at Luca and his companion with a fawning expression. "Thank you so much, both of you. If you hadn't caught this bastard, I wouldn't be alive today." As he spoke, the guy even tried to squeeze out a few tears. However, Luca immediately frowned, pulled the hood of the Gwen on the ground back up, and used his body to block the homeless man. With a slight frown, he questioned her in a somewhat serious tone. You're saying he robbed me. What did he steal from you? Upon hearing this, the homeless man's eyes darted around. Although he was somewhat afraid, he still pointed to the small, somewhat tattered package in Gwen's hand on the ground. This is it. These are all the things he stole from me. Upon hearing this, Luca immediately reached for the package. However, a cold smile immediately appeared on his face. With a flick of his wrist, the few loose items inside the package scattered all over the floor. You mean these things are yours? At this moment, the homeless man wanted to continue to explain himself, but Luca's gaze towards him became increasingly dangerous. If you were to say that a parallel world might have an evil Gwen who robs and steals, Luca might believe it to some extent. But you're pointing at this white spider mark and saying it's yours. Without waiting for the other party to speak again, Luca, who was already very impatient, shouted angrily. Roll. End of this chapter. Chapter 80 Gwen severely injured. Chapter 80 Gwen severely injured. At home in Orange. At this moment, several people were gathered in the living room, looking at the unconscious girl who was placed on the sofa with strange eyes. Green Bull and Wrench, those two quick-witted guys, couldn't help but fix their gazes on Luca's face. Finally, the younger Wrench couldn't contain himself any longer and whispered a question to Luca. Young master, wouldn't this be considered a kidnapping? Upon hearing this, Luca simply rolled his eyes and didn't bother to pay any attention to the guy. It's not like you've never done kidnapping or anything like that before. Our gaze returned to Gwen, the spider, lying on the sofa. That's right, at this moment, Luca was completely certain of the other party's identity. It wasn't just because she looked exactly like Gwen, or because of the few broken parts with spider markings in the girl's tattered pocket. More importantly, he has also found the white light that Luca saw earlier. Anesthesia Watch. Detective Conan World 4-5. Manufacturer, Professor Agasa. Core component, silk shooter. Crafting materials, 1 watch face, 1 anesthetic needle, 1 crosshair scope. Item description, a very common spy gadget. It contains a special anesthetic needle solidified from a potent anesthetic agent. Upon injection, it automatically degrades and disintegrates within the body, instantly rendering the victim unconscious. Aiming in the dark significantly increases the hit rate. Friendly reminder: the duration of unconsciousness for the person under anesthesia depends on the duration of the event, and they will actively seek a suitable position to sit down and wait for the performance to end tilde. Tilde, although Luca himself didn't understand why something like a web shooter would end up being synthesized into an anesthesia watch. But at least this confirms that the Gwen in front of us is indeed Spider-Woman. Besides, whatever the underlying principle, at least Conan's gadget collection has taken another step forward. Playing with the web shooter in his hand, Luca quietly pondered the origins of the Gwen before him. Just then, Big White, who had just finished treating Gina upstairs, finally came down. Upon seeing this, Luca immediately gave the order. Big White, check this woman's physical condition. Some of the more confused individuals, upon hearing this, took small steps to the sofa, their green scanning beams quickly sweeping across it to begin diagnosing the information. The patient is extremely weak, with multiple fractures, a minor fracture in the left leg, severe contusions in the arm, and low neurotransmitter activity. As the scan was completed, Dubai rattled off a series of symptoms that sounded quite serious. Upon hearing this, Chang Gong gave his young master a strange look. That clearly means, is this what you meant by, that kick was definitely okay? Fortunately, White managed to salvage the situation for Luca at the last moment. Based on current assessments, the patient suffered a severe attack 2 days ago, but the cause of his current coma is unknown. We recommend that he receive treatment as soon as possible. Luca frowned slightly upon hearing this. 2 days ago? Yes, due to the patient's special physical condition and the fact that simple bandaging has been performed, some injuries have begun to heal on their own. However, we still recommend providing further treatment. Dubai dutifully gave his assessment. No wonder he couldn't wake up after just one harrow impact. In fact, Luca had tried to wake the other person up on the way back, since the attack of strength-enhancing shoes was a rather strange concept of damage. Although it could knock people unconscious, it usually didn't cause much damage. When Luca realized he couldn't wake her up, he had already noticed that she seemed to have other injuries, but he didn't expect the situation to be so serious. However, upon closer reflection, although the other party demonstrated the spider sensibility when they were on the street, their physical abilities were indeed quite different from what one would expect of Spider-Man. It seems to be due to the injury. But who could have injured Spider-Man like this? Was he injured in this world, or was it from a battle before he traveled here? Although Luca had already concluded that the other party was a visitor from a parallel universe, he was not ready to forcibly wake the other party up since he couldn't figure it out yet. He's Spider-Man, after all. If we accidentally kill him, it could cause all sorts of trouble. Turning to Samira beside him, Luca gave another order. Aunt Samira, could you help Big White give this girl a proper checkup and treatment? If she wakes up in the middle of the night, keep her under control and prevent her from running around. Then notify me immediately. Samira didn't say much upon hearing this, and immediately cooperated with Big White to take the seriously injured Gwen to another room for further treatment. All right, if there's nothing else, everyone can go home. The others had no objections to Luca's instructions and immediately dispersed. However, instead of going shopping with Luca in the afternoon, Wrench, who was escorting the order samples back to the company with the company's researchers, took the initiative to come up to him and whispered something. Young Master, on the way to the company lab this afternoon, several company employees kept subtly asking me about your development process of the order. Although the Wrench participated in the exhibition as a technician, he does indeed have the relevant capabilities. But he is still essentially a bodyguard and mercenary, so he is naturally more sensitive to this kind of thing. However, Luca only frowned slightly upon hearing this and asked softly, "What are the identities of those employees who were asking questions?" "They're mostly researchers from the company's R&D department, but there are also 2 who should be subordinates of the sales team," Wrench replied. "It shouldn't be a big deal. It's normal for people to be curious," Luca said. However, after thinking it over, Luca decided to be more cautious. Make a note of those people who are trying to get information. Anyway, you'll probably want to work with the research department on some gadgets later, so keep an eye on them for me and let me know as soon as you have any questions. Upon hearing Luca's instructions, Wrench nodded to indicate that he had noted them down. However, he immediately put on a bitter face and looked at Luca, whispering his defense. "Young Master, I don't want to work in the research department. I want to learn from you. Some of those guys aren't even as capable as me." Although what the Wrench said was true, Luca did not agree to it at all and just rolled his eyes at the guy. "You say they're curious. I think you're even more curious than they are." Of course, Luca didn't rule it out and then added something else. "You can try developing accessories and derivative models for the order with them first, and then I'll let you join me on a suitable project later." "Well, the prerequisite is that I learn some things myself first, so I don't give myself away." End of this chapter. All right, legends, that's it for today. If you're ready for the next chapter, smash that like button and flood the comments right now. Remember, we've got 3 days to prove this story needs to continue. Subscribe so you don't miss the drop, and I'll meet you in the next audiobook.